Hi, my name's Laura McKendry and I'm an artist and illustrator. Working with clients such as John Lewis, Waterstones and Profile Books. My images have been published globally for book covers, packaging and merchandise. I teach drawing and illustration at Central St Martin's University of the Arts London and also run creative workshops at other venues in a playful and relaxed way. My creative process is all about living playfully, being open to new ideas, finding inspiration, and having the courage to try something new and make mistakes. For that, I explore different techniques with watercolour, a material that feels immediate, quick, and fresh. In this Domestica course, you will learn to paint with watercolour, generating exciting illustrations with playful techniques. For the final project, you will fill a sketchbook with rich and playful watercolour illustrations. First, we will start with the basics, getting the best out of our brushes and taking them for a ride with our sketchbook. We will then play with wet and dry watercolour and experiment with tone and value. Then it's time to expand our universe of creativity with colour. We will hunt for colours around us, have fun with abstract and imaginative compositions, and discover together what happens when colours bleed. We will then combine our understanding of colour, watercolour technique, mark making and collage to create playful and unique illustrations. Finally, we will enrich our sketchbook by blending and expanding our ideas, so its blank pages become a new opportunity for creativity. By the end of this course, you will have mastered your watercolour skills, plus your creative, playful mind will be feeling alive. For this course, we will use watercolour, brushes, drawing materials, and of course, a sketchbook. This course is for anyone who wants to use sketchbooks as a playground and explore new ideas with watercolour using non-traditional and experimental techniques. Experiment and wake up your curiosity and playfulness through your sketchbook.
Need to run Windows on your Mac? Parallels Desktop makes it simple to integrate Windows apps into your macOS workflow. Install Windows in minutes and stay productive without hassle. Run the apps you need, when you need them, with full compatibility with the latest macOS and Windows. Get the best of both worlds. Download Parallels Desktop today.
Good morning. The hearing will come to order. The Committee on Armed Services has convened this hearing to consider the pending nomination of Mr. Pete Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense. And at this point, in light of the continued suffering and death in and around Los Angeles, California, I'm going to ask my colleagues and those in the audience to observe a moment of silence. Amen. Thank you. I also want to take this opportunity to thank my good friend, Ranking Member Jack Reed. This is my first opportunity to chair this committee in this Congress. I want to thank Senator Reed. Under his chairmanship, he proved time after time that he cares deeply about national security and about the United States of America, and particularly the men and women who wear the uniform and stand watch both here and around the world to protect the United States. Senator Reed, I want to thank you for the many courtesies that you have extended to me in the past, and I look forward to working with you again in a bipartisan fashion this Congress. It's also appropriate to recognize and welcome 3 senators attending their very first Senate Armed Service Committee hearing as members. Senator Banks of Indiana, Senator Sheehy of Montana, and Senator Slotkin of Michigan. We are excited to have you as committee colleagues and look forward to many important contributions from each of you. And Senator Slotkin, as I look down at the end of the dais there, it seems that only a week or 2 ago I was sitting in that very chair being recognized by the chairman of the committee, the distinguished senator from Michigan. So time flies. Now, let me say this. We had a very appropriate expression of approval by the members of the members of the audience as our nominee and his family walked in. The distinguished ranking member and I sincerely hope that that is the last signal of approval or disapproval in today's hearing. People of the public are here. They're welcome to observe today's hearing. And Senator Reed and I agree, though, that no disruptions will be allowed. Audience members may not verbally or physically distract from the hearing, to include shouting, standing, or raising signage or gestures that block the view of the audience. And we're very serious about this, aren't we, Mr. Reed? And
absolutely, sir.
Those who do so will be immediately escorted from the room. Again, welcome to the witnesses, to his friends, and to interested members of the public. If confirmed, Mr. Pete Hegseth would assume the role in a moment of consequence. The United States faces the most dangerous security environment since World War II. We're witnessing the explosive growth and reach of China's hard power. We're also observing the emergence of an axis of aggressors. That coalition is characterized by broadening and deepening military cooperation among the dictatorships ruling China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Terrorism remains a threat as Israel wages war against Hamas and Hezbollah, and as the Assad regime collapses in Syria. America has entered a window of maximum danger, and the department needs energetic and focused civilian leadership. Those values begin at the top with the Secretary of Defense.
तूने सुना था ना ये वाला रास्ता मजा आ रहा है वैसे भी दूसरे रास्ते पे पूरे साल पानी भरा रहता है इसलिए सोचा कि इस रास्ते से चलते हैं भूल हो गई चुनने में
चुनने में भूल तो 10 साल पहले हुई थी देखिए क्या हाल बना दिया दिल्ली का।
तो
अब बस अब नहीं सहेंगे, बदल के रहेंगे।
इस बार ना करें चुनने में भूल, खिलाएं कमल का फूल।
कि भैया पैसे गिनते रहो या कुछ चाय वाय पिलाओगे?
आइए
क्या कीजिएगा इस धनराशि का?
अरे बैंकिंग कॉरेस्पॉन्डेंट द्वारा बैंक में डिपॉजिट करा दूंगा।
3 नियम याद है ना?
लो, आइए।
पहला, आईडी चेक कीजिए, करेक्ट। दूसरा, मशीन की जांच, और तीसरा नियम है पेमेंट की रिसीट। लेन देन करते समय ये 3 नियम याद रखिएगा ताकि कोई नुकसान ना हो। आरबीआई कहता है
जानकार बनिए,
सतर्क रहिए।
सुना आपने?
Many of my distinguished colleagues have served in a significant tenure on this committee, and our meetings are fairly long. We should reflect over previous secretaries of defense and their hearings and ask ourselves a simple question. Has the civilian leadership of the Pentagon under the administration of both parties proven up to the challenge? Often the answer has been no. The civilian leadership has not built the Department of Defense to meet the moment. And this is our moment to correct that. A few examples illustrate how leaders in the past have fallen short. Most of the department's signature programs run years behind schedule and billions of dollars over cost. Vital initiatives have suffered, such as the F-35, the new Sentinel ICBM, and the Navy's shipbuilding program, including the Constellation-class frigate. The Department of Defense desperately needs civilian leaders who listen to the advice of combatant commanders, many of whom would benefit from innovative systems. Yet a risk-averse DoD culture has kept too many promising technologies on the wrong side of the so-called valley of death. That tenuous period between experimental prototypes and production contracts. Defense companies backed by venture capital receive less than 1% of defense contracts. As we all know, the Pentagon still cannot even pass an audit. The department must simplify and streamline its bureaucracy so it can respond to innovation. Staffs have ballooned. Organizations are top-heavy. Civilian leaders have promised time and again to slim down the bureaucracy, and perhaps genuinely hoped to. Every day, men and women in uniform make tremendous contributions to U.S. security. They and the American people deserve a Pentagon that does the same. Today's Department of Defense is no longer prepared for great power competition. It is not a national defense institution ready to achieve and sustain technological supremacy across the range of operations. Admittedly, the nomination is unconventional. The nominee is unconventional. Just like that New York developer who rode down the escalator in 2015 to announce his candidacy for president. That may be what makes Mr. Hegseth an excellent choice to improve this unacceptable status quo that I just described. He is a decorated post-9/11 combat veteran. He will inject a new warrior ethos into the Pentagon, a spirit that can cascade from the top down. Mr. Hegseth will bring energy and fresh ideas to shake up the bureaucracy. He will focus relentlessly on the warfighter and the military's core missions, deterring wars and winning the ones we must fight. He will bring a swift end to corrosive distractions such as DEI. Today, many simply acknowledge and live with these systemic problems I have mentioned earlier in acquisition, accountability, technology transition, and organizational civil service reform. Mr. Hegseth will actually move to fix these issues decisively. In short, I'm confident that Mr. Hegseth, supported by a team of experienced top officials, will get the job done. The Secretary of Defense is an incredibly important position, but the Secretary's span of control is limited. The Pentagon is vast with 3 million plus personnel, uniformed civilian and contractor. A successful secretary understands that steering the ship means focusing his attention on strategic level priorities. The secretary must be supported with exceptional subordinates who will run the day-to-day affairs of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the military services, and the other DoD components. I'm also confident that as an infantryman, Mr. Hegseth understands the military principle of commander's intent. Communicate the clear objective, empower subordinates to use initiative and judgment, and hold everybody accountable. We must not underestimate the importance of having a top-shelf communicator as Secretary of Defense. Other than the president, no official plays a larger role in telling the men and women in uniform, the Congress, and the public about the threats we face and the need for a peace through strength defense policy. I have no doubt Mr. Hegseth will excel in a skill in which many of his predecessors have fallen short. Much has been made of both Mr. Hegseth's personal life and some of his policy pronouncements. Regarding his personal conduct, Mr. Hegseth has admitted to falling short, as we all do from time to time. It is noteworthy that the vast majority of the accusations leveled at Mr. Hegseth have come from anonymous sources. Contrast these anonymous accusations with the many public letters of support and commendation. We have seen letters from people who served with Mr. Hegseth. These individuals have worked with him professionally. They really know him and his character. These patriotic Americans have been willing to put their names and reputations on the line to support Mr. Hegseth. I look forward to sharing these testimonials with the American people. Let me mention one right now. It comes from David Bellavia, who earned the Medal of Honor for heroic actions in combat in Fallujah, Iraq. David Bellavia writes the following: Pete is fearless, unflappable, and confronts conflicts head-on. He's a leader to the core. When Pete is confirmed as the next Secretary of Defense of the United States of America, this country will finally know the privilege of having a true ambassador able to speak on behalf of this generation and its two-decade global war on terror. Washington doesn't build men like Pete. Combat builds men like Pete. As I said, there are more letters expressing the same endorsement. Today, we'll hear from the nominee directly. I want to thank Mr. Hegseth as well as his loved ones for being here today. I look forward to discussing his nomination. I look forward to hearing from Mr. Hegseth about the ways he hopes to rebuild the American strength that secures the peace. And so now I turn to my friend and colleague, Ranking Member Reed, for his opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to first congratulate you on your chairmanship. I look forward to continuing our committee's strong tradition of bipartisanship and collaboration. And thank you for your thoughtful and conscientious service to the committee over many years. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd also like to take a moment to join Chairman Wicker in welcoming our new members, Senator Slotkin, Senator Banks, and Senator Sheehy. Welcome. We look forward to working with you. Mr. Hegseth, I welcome you and your family to today's hearing, and I'm also glad to recognize my former colleague, Norm Coleman, and Congressman Mike Waltz. Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Hegseth, I want to begin by saying that I respect and appreciate your military service in the Army National Guard. I know from experience that there is no greater privilege than to lead American soldiers, and I thank you for answering the call. You have been nominated to be the Secretary of Defense. The Secretary is responsible for leading a department of 3.5 million service members and civilians, an annual budget of nearly $900 billion, and hundreds of thousands of aircraft, ships, submarines, combat vehicles, satellites, and the nuclear arsenal. The Secretary also plays a powerful role with our allies, partners, and adversaries abroad. And as we speak, China is seeking to undermine our interests, intimidate our friends, and challenge our standing in the world. Russia's campaign against Ukraine threatens not only Europe, but the entire global order. Ongoing violence in the Middle East has teetered on the edge of all-out war, and the ideologies and actions of violent extremists endanger our citizens, even on our own soil, as the recent tragedy in New Orleans painfully reminds us. These are perilous times, and the position of Secretary of Defense demands a leader of unparalleled experience, wisdom, and above all else, character. The Secretary is expected to be a fair, nonpartisan, and responsible leader, as well as a trustworthy advocate for the men and women that he leads. Mr. Hegseth, I do not believe that you are qualified to meet the overwhelming demands of this job. We must acknowledge the concerning public reports against you. A variety of sources, including your own writings, implicate you with disregarding the laws of war, financial mismanagement, racist and sexist remarks about men and women in uniform, alcohol abuse, sexual assault, sexual harassment, and other troubling issues. I have reviewed many of these allegations and find them extremely alarming. Indeed, the totality of your own writings and alleged conduct would disqualify any service member from holding any leadership position in the military, much less being confirmed as the Secretary of Defense. Nonetheless, I understand that you reject many of these reports as they involve whistleblowers, non-disclosure agreements, and anonymous, although numerous, sources, including those who have faced political intimidation for sharing their experiences. I hope you will address each of these allegations thoroughly and truthfully during your testimony. Just as importantly, I hope you will pledge to prevent any repercussions for whistleblowers, both civilian and military, if confirmed. Mr. Hegseth, during our meeting last week, you said that if confirmed, your top priority would be, quote, restoring a warrior culture to the Department of Defense, because you believe the U.S. military has been weakened by political correctness. Over the years, you have made clear your opinion of the military's diversity initiatives. As you have said, quote, diversity is not our strength, unity is. And on a recent podcast, you said, quote, I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. When I joined the Army as a young officer in the 1970s, the U.S. military was rife with racial tension. Women were prohibited from serving in most roles. Gay service members were banned, and we relied on a national draft to fill our ranks. The soldiers I served with were proud to do so, but it was certainly not the nation's most capable military by any standard. We have made great progress since then. Today, the Department of Defense is fully integrated. Every race and religion is accepted. Women serve in all combat roles and leadership positions. Sexual orientation is irrelevant to service, and the all-volunteer force visibly reflects the nation it protects. Our military is more diverse than it has ever been, but more importantly, it is more lethal than it has ever been. This is not a coincidence. Mr. Hegseth, I hope you will explain why you believe such diversity is making the military weak and how you propose to undo that without undermining military leadership and harming readiness, recruitment, and retention. Mr. Hegseth, another reason I'm deeply concerned about your nomination is your disregard for the law of armed conflict and your support for service members who have been convicted of war crimes. You have championed the pardoning of military members who were turned in by their fellow soldiers and SEALs. And let me emphasize that. They weren't discovered by reporters. They were turned in by fellow soldiers and fellow SEALs. And also pardoning of military contractors convicted of killing 14 Iraqi citizens without cause. You have also advocated for the restitution of interrogation methods like waterboarding that have been defined as torture, and you have belittled the advice and counsel of the Judge Advocates General while on deployment. In your book, The War on Warriors, you write, quote, should we follow the Geneva Convention? If our warriors are forced to follow rules arbitrarily and asked to sacrifice more lives so that international tribunals feel better about themselves, aren't we just better off in winning our wars according to our own rules? Mr. Hegseth, I would ask that you explain how you, if confirmed, would maintain good order and discipline within our forces and the support of our allies and partners by rejecting international law and the law of war. I'm also concerned about your abilities as a competent manager of organizations far less complex than the Department of Defense. From 2008 to 2010, you led the organization Veterans for Freedom, which had an annual budget of less than $10 million. In each year you were in charge, expenses far exceeded revenues until the organization teetered on bankruptcy and had to be merged with another group. In fact, according to public reporting, an independent forensic accountant reviewed the organization's finances and discovered evidence of gross financial mismanagement. I would note that this report has not been made available to any government agencies.
कंडीशन यूजुअली ऐसी होती है, किसी का पैर नहीं होता, किसी की आंखें निकली होती हैं, किसी की स्पाइन पूरी टूटी होती है, तो आपका गिल्ट अलाउ नहीं करता कि आप ऐसे डॉग्स को इग्नोर करें। मेरा नाम दितेज है और मैं अर्थलिंग्स ट्रस्ट का को फाउंडर हूँ। अर्थलिंग्स ट्रस्ट एक छोटा सा एनिमल वेलफेयर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है नोएडा में, जहाँ पे 350 से भी ज़्यादा बीमार बेसहारा जानवर रहते हैं। 26 दिसंबर 2018 से लेके पिछले 5 साल में हमने बहुत सारे जानवरों की रक्षा करी है, उनको बचाया है। अराउंड 5000 से ज़्यादा जानवर जो कि कभी ट्रेन से कट के आता था, किसी की आँख फूट जाती थी, किसी को लोग मारते थे, उसके पूरे मुंह से खून निकल रहा होता था, किसी के ऊपर एसिड अटैक होता था, किसी को सेक्सुअली असॉल्ट किया जाता था। ऐसे सारे जानवरों को हमने हमारे यहाँ पे आश्रय दिया है। बहुत सारे जानवरों की हेल्प करते करते हमने अपनी छोटी सी दुनिया बना ली थी कि लेकिन लास्ट ईयर 12 जुलाई 2023 को जब यमुना में बाढ़ आई तो हमारा शेल्टर पूरा डूब गया। देखते ही देखते शाम को 6:30 बजे बड़े परेशान थे हम कि उनको कहाँ लेके जाएं, और देखते ही देखते विदिन 4 आवर्स पानी हमारी एंकल से लेके हमारी गर्दन तक पहुँच गया। 28 घंटे के पूरे ऑपरेशन के बाद, बहुत लोगों की मदद के बाद हमने अपने सारे जानवरों को वहाँ से निकाला, लेकिन फिर भी हमारे 9 कुत्ते डूब के मर गए। उसके बाद हमारे जो सारे डॉग्स हमने वहाँ से निकाले थे, अलग अलग शेल्टर्स में गए, बट उनको हमें वापस तो लाना था और हमारे पास कोई ऑप्शन नहीं थी। बट हमने डिसाइड करा कि नहीं, हम वापस उसी जगह पे नहीं जाएंगे। हमारा सामान गया था, सब कुछ बर्बाद हो गया था, हमारे सोलर पैनल्स, हमारे मेडिसिन, टेबल, फ्रिज, ओजोनाइजर, सब कुछ खराब हो गया था और हमारे पास ऑप्शन था कि हम वहाँ वापस जाएं, बट हमने डिसाइड किया नहीं। इसीलिए हमने एक लैंड लीज पे लिया और विदिन 2 मंथ्स हमने एक नया शेल्टर बनाया, जो कि अभी जहाँ पे हम हैं, हमारे सारे जानवर हैं, विच इज़ सेक्टर 81 नोएडा। लेकिन उसके बाद इतनी आर्थिक तंगी हमारी तरफ आई क्योंकि केयर में हम कभी कॉम्प्रोमाइज़ नहीं करना चाहते थे। आप कुत्तों का खाना स्पॉन्सर कर सकते हैं, आप उनकी ब्लड टेस्ट स्पॉन्सर कर सकते हैं, सर्जरी स्पॉन्सर कर सकते हैं। आपकी एक डोनेशन से इन सब की देखभाल करना बहुत ज़्यादा ईजी हो जाएगा और हम उनको बिना कॉम्प्रोमाइज़ करे वो केयर प्रोवाइड कर पाएंगे जिसके हकदार हैं।
Unfortunately, most of the people who call themselves business owners are actually not business owners. In reality, they are self-employed. And yes, there is a difference between the two. A self-employed person can call himself on his visiting card a CEO, managing director, or anything they want. But if this person or this business owner does not show up on work one day, the whole business will come to a standstill. एक भी दिन नहीं गए तो काम को धक्का लगेगा. Business is dependent on this person. Now, a real business owner, on the other hand, is free to decide his schedule. If they want, they can work for 6 hours a day. If they want, they can work only for 4 days in a week. And they can do all this because they have put a system and process in place. And the business is not solely dependent on the business owner and his drive. Now, if you are someone who wants to make this transition from being self-employed, dhakka maar operator, pasina, to become a business owner, then I have something very interesting for you. Okay, but first let me just quickly introduce myself. My name is Dr. Amit Parekh. I'm an entrepreneur for over 1.5 decades now, and I'm also an internationally certified business success coach. I've been recognized as a world greatest leader in business coaching industry by Asia One publication, which covers Asia, America, and Africa. Most trusted business coach award by Governor of Maharashtra, and I'm a recipient of Inspiring Indian Award by Economic Times. Now, I want to invite you to spend 3 hours with me at my business scale-up workshop on a Sunday from comfort of your home or office. Now, more than 100,000 entrepreneurs have been part of this workshop, and they have taken these learnings, applied to their businesses, and they have become true business owners, not the dhakka maar operators. The workshops will help them put the business on track, scale their businesses, become more profitable in all the ways and means they wanted it to be. Now, you can choose to register right now, and if you do that, I will offer you 3 of my best video programs free of charge. Number 1 is Bulletproof Marketing, how to build a lead generation system. Number 2, Sales Explosion, increase sales and operation excellence, which will automate your business. Now, these bonuses are worth 20,000 rupees, but you will get them absolutely free and totally and completely free if you register right now. Now, the bonuses have been given for a short period of time. So if you're ready to grow your business and transition from a Dakkamar operator to a business owner, click the sign up button, pay ₹99, book your seat right now, and I will see you inside with all the structures, all the systems, all the frameworks which you need to take your business to next level. And if you feel this is what you want, this is for you, sign up right now and I'll see you inside, help you build process and system which will make you a real business owner. Click now, see you inside, bye-bye.
Which is, I think, alarming. But a Republican advisor to you during your tenure at the organization who read the report stated, and I quote, "I watched him run an organization very poorly, lose the confidence of donors. The organization ultimately folded and was forced to merge with another organization who individuals felt could run and manage funds on behalf of donors more responsibly than he could. I don't know how he's going to run an organization with an $857 billion budget and 3 million individuals." And that is the only comment we've had and the only access we've had to the forensic report. A similar thing happened with the Concerned Veterans for America, a second veterans group that you led from 2011 until 2016. During those 5 years, tax records show that the organization spent more than it raised. Just as troubling are reports that a significant amount of debt was incurred from social events and parties filled with excessive drinking and questionable personal behavior. Mr. Hegseth, I hope you will explain what actions you will take, if confirmed, to be a better steward of Defense Department's large budget. Finally, while I appreciate our meeting last week, it is unacceptable that you did not meet with any other Democratic members of this committee before this hearing, as has been our bipartisan tradition. During my time in the Senate, I have voted for and worked closely with Secretaries of Defense appointed by Republican presidents. While we may disagree politically, there was always an understanding that rank partisanship should have no place when it comes to providing for the men and women who serve in uniform. And Mr. Hegseth, I am troubled by the many comments you have made both as a commentator and in your published writings. For example, in your book, American Crusade, you wrote, quote, "Modern leftists who represent the soul of the modern Democratic Party literally hate the foundational ideas of America." You also wrote, "The other side, the left, is not our friend. We are not esteemed colleagues, nor mere political opponents. We are foes. Either we win or they win. We agree on nothing else." Mr. Hegseth, if confirmed as Secretary of Defense, you would lead an organization that, like the country it represents, is composed of Democrats and Republicans. Yet your language suggests that you regard many of these men and women as foes. And I would ask you to explain why service members and civilians who do not share your political opinions can trust that they will not be targeted during your tenure. Indeed, the challenge of the Secretary of Defense is to remove partisan politics from the military. You propose to inject it. This would be an insult to the men and women who have sworn to uphold their own apolitical duty to the Constitution. Mr. Hegseth, you are the 9th nominee for Secretary of Defense that I've had the honor to consider as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. I have voted in favor of all your predecessors, including those in the first Trump administration. Unfortunately, you lack the character and composure and competence to hold the position of Secretary of Defense. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Reid. And now it's my privilege and honor and pleasure to recognize 2 witnesses who have come forward to introduce our nominee. First, I recognize my former colleague and former Senator Norm Coleman of Minnesota for the purpose of an introduction. Norm, we are glad to see you and glad to have you back, and you are recognized for an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Reid, members of the committee, my former colleagues, I'm honored to introduce a son of Minnesota to you, Pete Hegseth. As a senator from Minnesota, I spent many hours with this young man as he walked the halls of Congress advocating on behalf of America's veterans. And he is young in the best sense of the word. He is strong, focused, intelligent, incisive, a great listener, and is almost supernaturally energetic, just what we need in a Secretary of Defense in times of massive change. He is the real deal. F. Scott Fitzgerald was a writer in my city of St. Paul, and so the problem with America is that there are no second acts. He was wrong. Pete was a brave soldier, has been an able communicator, and I believe is about to begin a great second act as our Secretary of Defense. He has struggled and overcome great personal challenges. Please don't give into the cynical notion that people can't change. We need the ones who can change to lead us, to be beacons of hope, and to remind us that grace can lead us home. 4 years ago, President Biden's nominee, Lloyd Austin, a good and honorable man, received 97 votes on the floor of the Senate. And we went through the debacle of the Afghanistan withdrawal. Putin invaded Ukraine. The Houthis endanger our shipping lanes. We witnessed Israeli miracles against America's enemies in the Middle East, where the United States was more of an impediment than a help. Our recruitment numbers have sunk dramatically, and our southern border has suffered a slow but dangerous invasion. Yes, Pete Hegseth is an out-of-the-box nominee, and I say it's high time to get out of the box. One more thought. The country longs for a government of less division and more respect and dignity. My hope is that this committee hearing provides what they are asking for. Disagree? Yes. Strongly if necessary. But then come together to support the nominee, this nominee, Pete Hegseth, of the one president we have at a time, laying aside partisan politics for the essential mission of national security upon which everything else depends. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, Norm. I do appreciate that and appreciate your presence today. I now have the honor and pleasure of introducing Congressman Waltz. I understand, Congressman, you are still a member of the House for another day or two.
Another day or two.
Okay, and I now recognize Congressman Waltz for whatever opening statement and introduction he might make.
Well, thank you, Chairman Wicker, and Chairman has a very nice ring to it. So congratulations, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of this committee. It is a privilege to appear before you today and urge the members of this committee to confirm Pete Hegseth as our next Secretary of Defense. And I'm not here today just to advocate on behalf of a future colleague, but to speak on behalf of someone I consider a dear friend for over a decade now. Like Pete, I served in the U.S. Army. Like Pete, I'm a veteran. We deployed to Afghanistan and all over the world at the height of the war on terror, which is the war of our generation. And like thousands of other warfighters, we've witnessed the hardships of war. We've experienced the loss of friends in combat. We've endured too much time away from family and friends. I can promise you this, no one hates war more than those who have had to go fight it. No one does. Pete's story, though, isn't that much different from the millions of other veterans. And they know it, and they appreciate him for the experiences that he's gone through. And after our country was brutally attacked on 9/11, Pete Hegseth answered the call of duty like so many others. He put the interests of this country ahead of his own. And I can tell you firsthand, as can the heroes sitting in this audience behind me, Pete's character of country, his selflessness, his duty, these are the key tenets that have shaped him into the leader that he is today. These are the traits that President Trump recognized when making the decision to nominate Pete for this critical role. He will bring the perspective of being the first Secretary of Defense to have served as a junior officer on the front lines, not in the headquarters, on the front lines in the war on, recognizes the human costs, the financial costs, and the policy drift that was discussed often in this very room that led us to decades and decades of war. So not only does he understand the threats he faces, but as the chairman mentioned, he is brilliant in my mind at communicating those to the American people in a way that is often not communicated in Washington, D.C., to reach out to the American people so that they understand why the military needs to do what it needs to do. And look, I have no doubt that he is going to get the Pentagon back to its primary mission, lethal readiness. That warrior ethos is what our enemies will respect. That warrior ethos is what our enemies will fear. And it's that warrior ethos that will keep the peace. And so, ladies and gentlemen, in my humble opinion, our military deserves better than it's getting. Our country faces a devastating recruitment crisis. Men and women are not volunteering to serve at the levels required. Our readiness is down. Our costs are up. And it seems like nearly every major weapon system, again, often discussed in this very room, is costing too much, delivering too little, and taking way too long. The bottom line is the status quo is unacceptable. It's not working. And the members of this committee, you all know it. You know it's not working. And the members of the House Armed Services know it's not working. And we have hearing after hearing, year after year. And here we are decades later describing the same problems. The Pentagon has continuously failed audits. The businesses that want to do business with the Pentagon have to pass an audit, but the entity itself fails an audit. Innovation is stalled, morale is down, standards have been weakened, and meritocracy is less valued. And as a result, our adversaries have been emboldened all over the world. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for change. It is time for change. You all have literally seen thousands of veterans, as the chairman cited one amazing Medal of Honor recipient. But we have seen thousands of veterans expressing their support for Pete. This is a man who can reinvigorate that warrior ethos, and this is a man that will lead. I can't imagine having a more capable partner in my position as National Security Advisor. Pete is a man of family, of faith, and he's committed to making our country strong again. And most importantly, brother, I know this in my core, he will always have as a first principle the service members that are out there on the front lines for all of us at the heart of every decision he makes. So senators, I urge you to support this confirmation. It is critical that President Trump has his national security team in place for the challenges ahead. And I thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for your testimony. And I'm guessing that each and every member of this committee will want to have you on speed dial for the next few years. So thank you both. Our two guests may stay, or I know they have other engagements and responsibilities also, but thank you both for your testimony. At this point, Mr. Hegseth, I'm required to ask you as a nominee a series of questions that the committee asks all civilian nominees who appear before it. If you would, please simply respond in the affirmative or negative to each question. Have you adhered to applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest?
Yes, sir.
Have you assumed any duties or taken any actions that would appear to presume the outcome of the confirmation process?
No, sir.
Exercising our legislative and oversight responsibilities makes it important that this committee, its subcommittees, and other appropriate committees of Congress receive testimony, briefings, reports, records, and other information from the executive branch on a timely basis. Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear and testify before this committee when requested?
Yes, sir.
Do you agree to provide records, documents, and electronic communications in a timely manner when requested by this committee, its subcommittees, or other appropriate committees of Congress, and to consult with the requester regarding the basis for any good faith delay or denial in providing such records?
Yes, sir.
Will you ensure that your staff complies with deadlines established by this committee for the production of reports, records, and other information, including timely responding to hearing questions for the record.
Yes, sir.
Will you cooperate in providing witnesses and briefers in response to congressional requests?
Yes, sir.
Will those witnesses and briefers be protected from reprisal for their testimony or briefings?
Yes, sir.
All right. So at this point, Mr. Hegseth, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, and all the members of this committee for this opportunity today. I'm grateful for and have learned a great deal from this advise and consent process. Our founders knew what they were doing. Should I be confirmed, I look forward to working with this committee, senators from both parties, to secure our nation. I want to thank the former senator from Minnesota, Norm Coleman, for his mentorship and friendship in this process, and the incoming National Security Advisor, Congressman, and more importantly for our purposes, Colonel Mike Waltz, for his powerful words. I'm grateful to them both. Thank you to my incredible wife, Jennifer, who has changed my life and been with me throughout this entire process. I love you, sweetheart, and I thank God for you. And as Jenny and I pray together every morning, all glory, regardless of the outcome, belongs to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. His grace and mercy abounds each day. May his will be done. Thank you to my father, Brian, and mother, Penny, as well as our entire family, including our 7 wonderful kids, Gunnar, Jackson, Peter Boone, Kensington, Luke, Rex, sorry, it's a lot of them, and Gwendolyn. Their future safety and security is in all of our hands. And to all the troops and veterans watching and here in the room, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, soldiers, pilots, sailors, Marines, Gold Stars, and more, too many friends to name. Officers, enlisted, black and white, young and old, men and women, all Americans, all warriors. This hearing is for you. Thank you for figuratively and literally having my back.
You are a misogynist. Not only that, you are a Christian Zionist. And you support the war in Gaza by the Zionists.
I want to thank the authorities for their swift reaction to that outburst and state that similar interruptions will be treated in like manner. Mr. Hegseth, you may continue.
Well, as I'll say again, thank you for figuratively and literally having my back. I pledge to do the same for all of you. It's an honor to come before this committee today as President Donald Trump's nominee for the office of Secretary of Defense. 2 months ago, 77 million Americans gave President Trump a powerful mandate for change, to put America first, at home and abroad. I want to thank President Trump for his faith in me and his selfless leadership for our republic. The troops have no better commander-in-chief than Donald Trump. As I've said to many of you in private meetings, when President Trump chose me for this position, the primary charge he gave me was to bring the warrior culture back to the Department of Defense. He, like me, wants a Pentagon laser-focused on lethality, meritocracy, warfighting, accountability, and readiness.
You may continue, sir.
Returning the Pentagon back to warfighting, that's it. That's my job.
Mr. Hegseth, suspend your remarks. Let me just say this. The Capitol Police are going to remove immediately individuals that are disrupting the hearing. I see a pattern attempted to be inflicted on the committee, and we're simply not going to tolerate that. You may proceed.
To bring back warfighting, if confirmed, I'm going to work with President Trump and this committee to, one, restore the warrior ethos to the Pentagon and throughout our fighting force. In doing so, we will reestablish trust in our military, addressing the recruiting crisis, the retention crisis, and readiness crisis in our ranks.
Members of the security force will remove members. Mr. Hegseth, you may.
The strength of our military is our unity and our shared purpose, not our differences. Number two, we're going to rebuild our military, always matching threats to capabilities. This includes reviving our defense industrial base, reforming the acquisitions process. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, no more valley of death for new defense companies, modernizing our nuclear triad, ensuring the Pentagon can pass an audit, and rapidly fielding emerging technologies. And number three, we're going to reestablish deterrence. First and foremost, we will defend our homeland, our borders, and our skies. Second, we will work with our partners and allies to deter aggression in the Indo-Pacific from the Communist Chinese. And finally, we will responsibly end wars to ensure that we prioritize our resources to reorient to larger threats. We can no longer count on reputational deterrence. We need real deterrence. The Department of Defense under Donald Trump will achieve peace through strength. And in pursuing these America First national security goals, will remain patriotically apolitical and stridently constitutional. Unlike the current administration, politics should play no part in military matters. We are not Republicans. We are not Democrats. We are American warriors. Our standards will be high and they will be equal, not equitable. That's a very different word. We need to make sure every warrior is fully qualified on their assigned weapons system, every pilot's fully qualified and current on the aircraft they are flying, and every general or flag officer is selected for leadership or promotion purely based on performance, readiness, and merit. Leaders at all levels will be held accountable, and warfighting and lethality and the readiness of the troops and their families will be our only focus. This has been my focus ever since I first put on the uniform as a young Army ROTC cadet at Princeton University in 2001. I joined the military because I love my country and felt an obligation to defend it. I served with incredible Americans in Guantanamo Bay, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and on the streets of Washington, D.C., many of which are with me here today. This includes enlisted soldiers I helped become American citizens, and Muslim allies I helped immigrate from Iraq and Afghanistan. Because when I took off the uniform, my mission never stopped. Now, it is true and has been acknowledged that I don't have a similar biography to defense secretaries of the last 30 years. But as President Trump also told me, we've repeatedly placed people atop the Pentagon with supposedly the right credentials, whether they are retired generals, academics, or defense contractor executives. And where has it gotten us? He believes, and I humbly agree, that it's time to give someone with dust on his boots the helm. A change agent, someone with no vested interest in certain companies or specific programs or approved narratives. My only special interest is the warfighter. Deterring wars, and if called upon, winning wars by ensuring our warriors never enter a fair fight. We let them win and we bring them home. Like many of my generation, I've been there. I've led troops in combat. I've been on patrol for days. I've pulled the trigger down range, heard bullets whiz by, flex-cuffed insurgents, called in close air support, led medevacs, dodged IEDs, pulled out dead bodies, and knelt before a battlefield cross. This is not academic for me. This is my life. I led then, and I will lead now. Ask anyone who's ever worked for me or with me. I know what I don't know. My success as a leader, and I very much look forward to discussing my organization's successes at Vets for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America. I'm incredibly proud of the work that we've done. But my success as a leader has always been setting a clear vision, hiring people smarter and more capable than me, empowering them to succeed, holding everyone accountable, and driving toward clear metrics. Build the plan, work the plan, and then work harder than everyone else around you. I've sworn an oath to the Constitution before, and if confirmed, I will proudly do it again. This time, for the most important deployment of my life. I pledge to be a faithful partner to this committee, taking input and respecting oversight. We share the same goals: a ready, lethal military, the health and well-being of our troops, and a strong and secure America. Thank you for the time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hegseth. Before we begin with member questions, I would like to remind my colleagues that consistent with the bipartisan staff agreement from December, and in concert with exactly how this committee dealt with the last Secretary of Defense nominee, each member will be recognized for one round of 7 minutes to question the nominee. Out of respect for the time of all members of this committee, the time limits will be tightly enforced. We've now been here 45 minutes, and I think we've done very well with the time. But at this point, I will begin my questioning of the nominee. Mr. Hegseth, you and your family have endured criticism of your nomination since it was announced in November. Let's get into this allegation about sexual assault, inappropriate workplace behavior, alcohol abuse, and financial mismanagement during your time as a nonprofit executive. I should note that the majority of these have come from anonymous sources in liberal media publications. But I want to give you an opportunity to respond to these allegations, sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that opportunity. You are correct. We undertook this responsibility with an obligation to the troops to do right by them for our warfighters. And what became very evident to us from the beginning, there was a coordinated smear campaign orchestrated in the media against us. That was clear from moment one. And what we knew is that it wasn't about me. Most of it was about President Donald Trump, who's had to endure the very same thing for much longer amounts of time. And he endured it in incredibly strong ways. So we, in some ways, knew it was coming. We didn't understand the depth of the dishonesty that would come with it. So from story after story in the media, left-wing media, we saw anonymous source after anonymous source based on second or third-hand accounts. And time again, stories would come out and people would reach out to me and say, you know, I've spoken to this reporter about who you really are, and I was willing to go on the record. But they didn't print my quote. They didn't print any of my quotes. Or I've worked with you for 10 years, or I was your accountant, or I was your chief operating officer, or I was your board member, or I was with you on 100 different tour stops for Concerned Veterans for America. No one called me. No one asked about your conduct on the record or off the record. Instead, a small handful of anonymous sources were allowed to drive a smear campaign, an agenda about me, because our left-wing media in America today, sadly, doesn't care about the truth. All they were out to do, Mr. Chairman, was to destroy me. And why do they want to destroy me? Because I'm a change agent and a threat to them, because Donald Trump was willing to choose me, to empower me, to bring the Defense Department back to what it really should be, which is warfighting. So I am willing to endure these attacks, But what I will do is stand up for the truth and for my reputation. False attacks, anonymous attacks, repeated ad nauseum, printed as nauseum, as facts. We have provided to the committee, Mr. Chairman, and I know you're going to share, on the record statement after on the record statement from people who have served with me, worked with me at Fox News, Concerned Vets, Vets for Freedom, you name it, from the top of the chain to the bottom, who will say, I treat them with respect, with kindness, with dignity. That's men, that's women, that's black, that's white, that's every background. I have prided myself as a leader of respecting people, being professional. That is the balance of mine. I'm not a perfect person, as has been acknowledged. Saved by the grace of God, by Jesus and Jenny. I'm not a perfect person, but redemption is real. And God forged me in ways that I know I'm prepared for. And I'm honored by the people standing and sitting behind me, and look forward to leading this Pentagon on behalf of the warfighters.
Thank you, Mr. Hegseth. And frankly, I'm sure there are millions of Americans watching who would agree that they've experienced that same sort of redemption. So I do appreciate that. I realize that it involves a little bearing of the soul, but thank you for that. Now let's talk about top line defense spending. I have a plan. I think you've read it. I've issued another plan for Freedom's Forge, which you've also had a chance to look at. And you have noted correctly that the current trend line of defense spending falling below 3% of our GDP is a threat to national security. You also said building the strongest and most powerful military in the world must be done responsibly, but it cannot be done on the cheap. You still agree with that, do you not?
Yes, sir, I do.
So tell us what you think about, particularly about my plan to make the Defense Department less bureaucratic, less top-heavy, cut out some of the bureaucracy and layers, make it more friendly to startups and to new ideas, contained in my 20 or so page white paper defending Freedom's Forge.
Senator, I've had a chance to review the Forged Act, that paper. Those are precisely the kinds of ideas that need to be pursued. And I look forward to working with this committee to ensure we cut the red tape, we incentivize innovation, we rebuild the defense industrial base, cut out the bureaucracy, all the things that are preventing the platforms and the tools from getting rapidly from our great defense companies here that should, and those that want to compete, into the hands of warfighters. But past his prologue on this, sir, I would just look at what President Trump did after the drawdowns of lead from behind under President Obama. President Trump rebuilt our military. He didn't start wars, he ended them, and he didn't allow wars to start on his watch. We've had the same kind of defense cuts under the Biden administration. And so look, I would present to the committee the reputation of President Donald Trump and me coming alongside him to ensure we have peace through strength by rebuilding our military, investing as necessary. Going under 3%, Mr. Chairman, is very dangerous.
Okay, we've got 45 seconds. Tell us, in that point, get us started at least talking about deterring China and the Indo-Pacific.
It starts with priorities. The 2017 National Defense Strategy was the first step in reorienting away from simply entanglement in the Middle East, which our generation knows a lot about, and reorienting the behemoth that is the Pentagon toward new priorities, specifically the Indo-Pacific. So that strategy has started and was barely followed through on under the Biden administration. So we're going to start by ensuring the institution understands that as far as threats abroad, the CCP is front and center, also obviously defending our homeland as well.
Thank you very much, Senator Reed. You're recognized.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my questioning, I would like to make 3 requests. First, many of my members would like a second round. That has been the custom. Senator Hagel was afforded 3 rounds. Senator Ash Carter, 2 rounds. And that was done by a Republican chairman with the consent and the appropriate guidance of Democrats. I must say, too, my recollection is I've never denied anyone the opportunity to ask the second round of questions as I chaired. I will request the second round.
6 months ago, I was diagnosed with diabetes,
and managing it without medication seemed like an impossible task. But Fitterfly's combination of expert coaches and advanced app and CGM made it possible for me. From my diet to my fitness, from my body pain to my mental health, everything was taken care of, and all the triggers that were causing my sugars to spike were analyzed, and my coaches guided me to modify my lifestyle accordingly. Fitterfly was an eye-opener.
Data science and analytics are not the trends of the future. They're happening right now. So having the skills to work with data is not only valuable, it is essential now as data becomes increasingly important for industries around the world. To help you get these essentials in place, Scalar is conducting a free class for professionals from any background who wish to learn data science and analytics. Whether you're looking to switch to a data-focused career or you just want to learn more about this growing field, this live class is perfect for you. Click on the link below to register.
And my time is running. I think these are
Oh, yeah, you're using your time. No, if the timekeeper will pause the time. I must say, I think we're going to have adequate time for questioning. And I know Democrat members have coordinated their questions as much as we have. And we are following the same exact precedent on all things that we did with Secretary Austin. So I respectfully understand what you're saying, but I think we have an agreement. It's been known for quite some time. And I intend to stick with that agreement, which we made last December. What is your second request?
Second, has been publicly reported, you and I have both seen the FBI background investigation of Mr. Hegseth. And I want to state for the record, I believe the investigation was insufficient, frankly. There are still FBI obligations to talk to people. They have not had access to the forensic audit, which I referenced to, and the person who had access to was quite critical of Mr. Hegseth. And I think people on both sides have suggested that they get the report. I know your colleagues have asked for it. Senator Thune assured me personally that he thought it was an appropriate idea. So I would ask, and I would say too, as a precedent, one of President Trump's appointees had similar, very complicated personal issues. The report was made available to all the members of the committee. We would be following precedent. I ask that that be made possible.
Again, there's been much discussion about this. And what I intend to do is follow the exact precedent that we've had for the last two hearings with regard to secretaries of defense. Not only Secretary Austin, but Secretary Mattis 8 years ago. And that was for the chair and the ranking member to see the report. And so that is my intention as chair of this committee.
Finally, Mr. Chairman, I have several letters that I would include for the record. One from Count Every Hero, which is an organization of retired 4-star generals and former secretaries of defense that is critical of the proposed purge panels. One from an organization for domestic violence. One for a Council on American Relations. And also several letters that raise questions. I would ask they be submitted for the record.
Without objection, they will be submitted. And Mr. Reed, your time is now expired. Just kidding. Yeah. You're recognized for 7 minutes.
Thank you. You're a very understanding chairman. I like that. I like that. Ms. Hegseth, you've written, and it's quote, "Oh yeah, and firing a general who isn't carried water for Obama and Biden's extra constitution and agenda-driven transformation for our military." Clean house, and start over. It's come to my attention that current serving military personnel have received emails threatening them with being fired for supporting the current DoD policies. One mail that was sent to a military officer with the subject line, "Clean house," reminiscent of your specific comment, states, and I quote, "With the incoming administration looking to remove disloyal, corrupt, traitorous, liberal officers such as yourself, we will certainly be putting your name into the list of those personnel to be removed. We know you support the woke DEI policies and will ensure you never again influence anyone in the future. You and the redacted spouse's name will be lucky if you're able to collect your military requirement," end quote. Now, I want to remind everyone that these policies that are being referred to date back decades, to the 1940s and 50s with respect to racial discrimination particularly, and administrations of both parties, including the Trump administration and their first party, caused those policies to be enforced. Mr. Hegseth, are you aware of these emails being sent to officers?
Senator, you mentioned the word accountability, which is something we have not had for the last 4 years.
Are you aware of these messages being sent to officers?
Certainly, I'm not aware of that. It's not one of my efforts, but there's been no accountability for the disaster of the withdrawal in Afghanistan. And that's precisely why we're here today.
Excuse me.
Is that leadership has been unwilling to take accountability. It's the time to restore that to our most senior ranks.
You've written publicly that DI policy is a distraction and have military personnel walking on eggshells. Do you believe that emails like that are essentially threatening both a serving officer and a spouse and claiming that they'll lose their pension will have a distraction and detract from the lethality?
Senator, you mentioned the 40s and 50s, and you're precisely right. The military was a forerunner in courageous racial integration in ways no other institutions were willing to do. I served with men and women of all backgrounds because of the courage of people decades and decades ago. Incredibly important. However, the DEI policies of today are not the same as what happened back then. They're dividing troops inside formations, causing commanders to walk on eggshells, not putting meritocracy first. That's the indictment that's made by those serving right now.
Excuse me.
And why we're having this conversation.
All of your public comments don't talk about meritocracy. They talk about liberal democratic efforts that are destroying the military, that those people are our enemies. That's not meritocracy. That's a political view. And your goal, as I see emerging, is to politicize the military in favor of your particular positions, which you've outlined extensively, which would be the worst blow to the professionalism of the United States military and would undercut readiness, undercut retention, because I can see officers receiving these emails beginning to wonder very seriously if they should continue. Let me change subject for a moment here. You've been instrumental in securing pardons for several convicted war criminals. In at least 2 of these cases, the military personnel who served in combat with these convicted service members were not supportive of the pardons. They did their duty as soldiers to report war crimes. Your definition of lethality seems to embrace those people who do commit war crimes, rather than those who stand up and say, this is not right. So what's the response to your service members who personally witnessed these and courageously reported them to their superiors?
Senator, as someone who's led men in combat directly and had to make very difficult decisions, I've thought very deeply about the balance between legality and lethality, ensuring that the men and women on the front lines have the opportunity to destroy with and close the enemy, and that lawyers aren't the ones getting in the way. I'm not talking about disavowing the laws of war or the Geneva Conventions or the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Sir, I'm talking about restrictive rules of engagement that these men and women behind me understand they've lived with on the battlefield, which has made it more difficult to defeat our enemies. In many of the cases you're talking about in particular, sir, There was evidence withheld. There was prosecutorial misconduct. And as someone who looks case by case and defaults to the warfighter, to the men and women with dust on their boots, not the second guessers in air-conditioned offices in Washington, D.C.
Excuse me.
I look case by case and was proud to work with President Trump to understand those cases and ensure that our warriors are always looked out for.
Those cases were adjudicated by who? People in Washington or fellow non-commissioned officers who had also served, sacrificed, and believed in the ethic of the military? Who were the court-martial?
Senator, in multiple cases, they were actually acquitted, but
some
charges
cases,
lingered.
yes,
Regardless of where those
some were
convening
convicted.
authorities were, yes, sir.
Some were, but others were convicted, and you asked for pardon. That's the only reason you asked for pardon, because they were convicted. But the other factor, too, is you've already disparaged in writing the Geneva Convention, the rules of law, all of these things. How will you be able to effectively lead a military in which one of the principal elements is discipline, respect for lawful authority? You have made statements to your platoon after being briefed by a JAG officer. Well, by the way, would you explain what a JAG-off is?
I don't think I need to, sir.
Why not?
Because the men and women watching understand.
Well, perhaps some of my colleagues don't understand.
It would be a JAG officer who puts his or her own priorities in front of the warfighters. Their promotions, their medals, in front of having the backs of those who are making the tough calls on the front lines.
Thank you, Senator Reid.
Interesting.
Thank you, Senator
Thank
Reid.
you very much.
Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Hegseth, to you and to your family. Thank you for the meeting that we had. We talked about a number of things. First and foremost was that nuclear weapons are foundational to our national defense, and having a safe, effective, and credible nuclear deterrent underpins our alliances, and as you know, it deters our adversaries. Nuclear deterrence has been, and you and I believe, agreed on this, it must continue to be unequivocally the highest priority mission of the Department of Defense. But deterrence only works if our adversaries believe our nuclear forces are effective and credible. All three legs of our triad are undergoing that generational recapitalization programs, and we cannot afford any more delays in those programs. Sir, do you believe and agree with President Trump's 2018 nuclear posture review that preventing adversary nuclear attacks is, quote, the highest priority of the United States?
Senator, yes, I do.
If confirmed, will you commit to supporting all three legs?
The sleep company is a company that makes sleep. Very deep sleep. Let me prove it. Start. Faster. 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 कहा था ना? Very deep sleep. क्योंकि हर मैट्रेस में है patented smart grid technology. The spine को precise firmness और pressure points को softness. The Sleep Company.
Makers of peaceful sleep.
Visit your nearest store now.
Of the nuclear triad and using every tool available to deliver these systems on schedule?
Senator, yes, I do, because ultimately our deterrence, our survival is reliant upon the capability, the perception, and the reality of the capability of our nuclear triad. We have to invest in its modernization for the defense of our nation.
While former secretaries of defense have stated that nuclear deterrence is the highest priority, we haven't really seen that translated into budget requests or using the tools like the Defense Production Act. You've spoken about increasing lethality. You've spoken about getting programs done faster. How would you actually implement a culture change so that we can see these delivery schedules move forward, be rewarded? I can tell you in most every briefing we have, the schedules we're on are too late. So what would you do?
Well, ultimately focused first on the things that are most important, as we have discussed, Senator, the nuclear triad, understanding whether it's the B-21 or the Minuteman to the Sentinel, all aspects of the Columbia class, submarines, ballistic missiles. What are the priorities that need to be focused on and ensure that in those particular cases, you mentioned it, Senator, the Defense Production Act, emergency powers. If we're at a place where our nuclear capabilities are perceived to not be what they are, that is an emergency. And we have an ally in our incoming commander-in-chief, in President Donald Trump, who has spoken about these things, understands the power and strength of nuclear deterrence, will not allow them
It's the
to be
existential
deprioritized.
threat. It's the existential threat to this nation. How do you change the culture? It's not just the Production Act that's going to be able to do it. How are you going to move forward faster?
Competition, Senator, is important, critically important. The Death Valley that was talked about, leveraging the innovation of Silicon Valley, which for the first time in generations has shown a willingness, desire, and capability to bring its best technologies to bear at the Pentagon, a Pentagon that has become too insular, tries to block new technologies from coming in. So we have to embrace that, there's some great Office of Strategic Capital, DIU initiatives that provide loans to companies to participate, because you have to invest in the defense industrial base for the longer term projects. We have the capability, the missiles and the munitions, but also to rapidly field emerging technologies that we need on the battlefield right now. So as we learn things, say in the war in Ukraine, those technologies, as we look at threats we're going to face, find ways to rapidly field those using off-the-shelf technologies or standard designs, modular designs. Another easy one, Senator, that became evident in the process is digital designs. The Pentagon often builds entire systems without first using a digital design.
Okay.
Which means you build prototypes and then scrap them and start over again. No private sector business could survive doing business that way. So there's a lot of innovation, and I'm going to hire a lot of smart people already have to help with that.
In the 2025 NDAA, it was established to a new position, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear Deterrence, Chemical and Biological Defense Policy and Programs. And that was established so we could cut through a lot of the bureaucratic stovepipes that we see in the office of the Secretary of Defense. If confirmed, will you direct the Department of Defense components to expeditiously implement this reform?
It sounds, I would want to look directly at exactly what that reform is.
It is
I
great.
take your word that it's great, Senator. I will review it robustly, and I look forward to implementing.
Okay, thank you. During the first Trump administration, the 2018 Nuclear Posture Review concluded that the U.S. needed to once again develop and deploy a nuclear-armed sea-launched cruise missile known as SLCM to offset significant Russian and Chinese advantages in theater range nuclear capabilities. Since then, Congress, on a strong bipartisan basis, has directed the Navy and the National Nuclear Security Administration to continue this effort. Do you support the SLCM program?
As of right now, Senator, based on what I know, I do. But one of my answers I'll have repeatedly throughout this morning is getting an opportunity to look under the hood, classified material, get an understanding of true capabilities vis-a-vis enemy capabilities. Because what we know right now on the nuclear, Senator, what I know on the nuclear side is that Russia and China are rushing to modernize and build arsenals larger than ours. We need to match threats to capabilities, and the systems we elevate will be tied to whether those capabilities are needed based on the adversaries we face.
Would you ensure that this program is executed according to law?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Senator.
What, short here, what is your plan to revitalize the industrial base in this country?
Needs to be real short.
Real short.
Serious investment targeted at systems that we truly need by also incentivizing competition and laser focus from the OSD, from the Office of Secretary of Defense, to all the particular strategic initiatives to revive them. So it's not just one system, it's multiple systems.
You may want to expand on that on the record. At this point, my colleagues, I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter organized by a group called Flag Officers for America, which has 120 retired generals and admirals offering their support for Mr. Hegseth's nomination. I ask unanimous consent. Without objection, it is entered into the record. Senator Shaheen.
Good morning, Mr. Hegseth.
Good morning, Senator.
I was pleased when I was contacted on your behalf about meeting before this hearing. I've been on this committee since 2011, and during that time, I voted to confirm 6 nominees to be Secretary of Defense from 3 administrations, 2 Democratic and 1 Republican, the first Trump administration. Every one of those nominees met with me and my Democratic colleagues on this committee before the hearing. So as you can imagine, I was disappointed when no one ever followed up. When we followed up with your office, you were not able to meet. Do you understand that if you're confirmed to be Secretary of Defense, that you will have a responsibility to meet with all members of this committee, not just Republicans?
Senator, I very much appreciate and understand the traditionally bipartisan nature of this committee. Their national defense is not partisan. It should not be about Republicans or Democrats. And so I look forward to working together with you and your colleagues on priorities facing this nation. Yes.
I think we would expect that. And one reason that I wanted to meet with you was because I thought it would be really helpful to better understand your views on women in the military. Because you've made a number of surprising statements about women serving in the military. As recently as November the 7th of 2024 on the Sean Ryan Show, you said, and I quote, "I'm straight up saying that we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective." The quote went on a little longer, but that was the gist of it. That was before you were nominated to be Secretary of Defense. Mr. Hegseth, do you know what percentage of our military is comprised of women?
I believe it's 18 to 20%, Senator.
It's almost 18%. And in fact, DOD's 2023 demographic report indicated that there are more women serving now and there are fewer separations. So they make up a critical part of our military. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, ma'am. Women in our military, as I have said publicly, have and continue to make amazing contributions across all aspects of our battlefield.
Well, you also write in your book, The War on Warriors, with the chapter, The Deadly Obsession with Women Warriors, that, quote, "Not only are women comparatively less effective than men in combat roles, but they are more likely to be objectified by the enemy and their own nation in the moral realms of war." Mr. Hegseth, should we take it to believe that you believe that the 2 women on this committee who have served honorably and with distinction made our military less effective and less capable?
I'm incredibly grateful for the 2 women who've served our military in uniform and including in the Central Intelligence Agency, contributions on the battlefield, indispensable contributions. Senator, I would like to clarify, when I'm talking about that issue, it's not about the capabilities of men and women, it's about standards. And this committee has talked a lot about standards that we unfortunately over time have seen eroded in certain duty positions, certain schools, certain places, which affects readiness, which is what I care about the most, readiness on the battlefield.
I appreciate that.
And so my comments point
however,
time and time again to standards.
Your statements publicly have not been to that effect. After your nomination, you did state to a group of reporters that you, quote, "support all women serving in our military today who do a fantastic job across the globe, including combat." So what I'm confused about, Mr. Hegseth, is which is it? Why should women in our military, if you were the Secretary of Defense, believe that they would have a fair shot and an equal opportunity to rise through the ranks? If on the one hand, you say that women are not competent, they make our military less effective, and on the other hand, you say, oh no, now that I've been nominated to be the Secretary of Defense, I've changed my view on women in the military. What do you have to say to the almost 400,000 women who are serving today about your position on whether they should be capable to rise through the highest ranks of our military?
Senator, I would say I would be honored to have the opportunity to serve alongside you, shoulder to shoulder, men and women, black, white, all backgrounds, with a shared purpose. Our differences are not what define us. Our unity and our shared purpose is what define us, and you will be treated fairly and with dignity, honor, and respect, just like every man and woman in uniform, just like the men and women that I've worked with in my veterans organizations, to include when I was a headquarters company commander in the Minnesota National Guard.
Well,
and
I
we had women in
appreciate
our
your
ranks as
11th
well.
hour conversion. But Mr. Chairman, for the record, I would like to submit Chapter 5, The Deadly Obsession with Women Warriors, for the record. Mr. Hegseth,
But without objection, it will be submitted. and
are you
accepted.
familiar with the Women, Peace, and Security agenda at the Department of Defense?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
This is a law that was signed during President-elect Trump's first term. It was legislation that I sponsored with Republican Senator Capito of West Virginia. It was co-sponsored by Marco Rubio, the nominee to be the President-elect's Secretary of State. It was led in the House of Representatives by Kristi Noem, the President-elect's nominee to be the Secretary of Homeland Security. It mandates that women be included in all aspects of our national security, including conflict resolution and peace negotiations. And at the Department of Defense, it has been the law for 8 years under both the Trump and Biden administrations. The DoD has incorporated women throughout its decision-making as a result. Every single combatant commander across 2 administrations has told this committee that this law and its implementation at the Department of Defense provides them a strategic advantage operationally. Based on your comments, it appears that the example that you would like to set, not only for women in this country, but for women across the globe, 50% of the world's population, as the prospective nominee to lead the most combat credible military in the entire world, is that women should not have an equal opportunity in our military. So will you commit to preserving the Women, Peace, and Security law at DoD and including in your budget the requisite funding to continue to restore and resource these programs throughout the DoD?
Senator, I will commit to reviewing that program and ensuring it aligns with America First national security priorities, meritocracy, lethality, and readiness. And if it advances American interests, it's something we would advance. If it doesn't, it's something we would
Well,
look at.
since former President Trump signed the law, I hope that he agrees with you.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. At this point, I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 5 letters of support from female service members and combat veterans who support Mr. Hegseth's nomination. These women represent diverse viewpoints, from a retired colonel with over 25 years of service to an active duty Navy surface warfare commander to a senior airman. They support Mr. Hegseth and comment on his focus on merit, warfighting readiness, military training status, and the warrior ethos. So without objection, it will be entered into the record. And now I'm honored to recognize Senator Cotton for 7 minutes.
Mr. Hegseth, let's continue on this line of questioning about what's sometimes referred to as women in combat. I think that phrase is something of a misnomer. Many members of this committee have served in combat in the last 25 years, to include women and men. I'm sure all those men served with women, whether they were military police officers or they were pilots or whether they were intelligence analysts or medics or what have you. You served. I assume you served with women who were on the front lines as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And were those women anything other than skilled, brave, and honorable in their service?
They were some of the best soldiers I worked with.
So women have been serving in combat for a long time. Women have even been serving in combat units like infantry battalions for a long time, in roles like medics or mechanics or what have you. So what we're talking about here specifically is women in ground combat roles, in jobs like infantrymen or artillerymen or special forces. Until about 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. Under Secretary Panetta, those roles were opened up to women to serve in. Has President Trump indicated at all that he plans to rescind or alter that guidance?
You're correct to point out, Senator, that these are the decisions that the Commander-in-Chief will have the prerogative to make. He has not indicated to me that he has plans to change whether or not women would have access to these roles. However, I would point out ensuring that standards are equal and high is of importance to him and great importance to me. Because in those ground combat roles, what is true is that the weight of the ruck on your back doesn't change. The weight of the 155 round that you have to carry doesn't change. The weight of the 240 Bravo machine gun you might have to carry doesn't change. And so whether it's a man or a woman, they have to meet the same high standards. And Senator, in any place where those things have been eroded or in courses, criteria have been changed in order to meet quotas, racial quotas or gender quotas, that is putting a focus on something other than readiness, standards, meritocracy, and lethality. So that's the kind of review I'm talking about, not whether women have access to ground combat.
Okay, so thank you. So you expect no change to that guidance, but as you point out, in these specific jobs, there are irreducible physical demands. We expect our intelligence analysts and our mechanics to be physically fit in the military, but it's different when you're in the infantry or the artillery. You just mentioned a few things. Let me point it out. An artillery shell weighs almost 100 pounds. An Abrams tank round weighs around 50 pounds. The M240 Bravo machine gun with its tripod weighs almost 50 pounds. The average weight of a full kit, ammo, water, commo, body armor for a soldier is over 100 pounds. Nothing you can do can change any of those things, right? That is physical reality.
Go ahead. Yes, Senator. And I would say the requirements to handle those things in a ground combat unit, as far as standards, can look different than those of a medic or a drone pilot. And so it's not that it has to be the same standard throughout, it's standards to maximize efficacy of that particular position.
Let me read a quote here from one Army officer. While it may be difficult for a 120-pound woman to lift or drag 250 pounds, the Army cannot artificially absolve women of that responsibility. It may still exist on the battlefield. The entire purpose of creating a gender-neutral test was to acknowledge the reality that each job has objective physical standards to which all soldiers should be held, regardless of gender. The intent was not to ensure that women and men will have an equal likelihood of meeting those standards. I assume, based on your testimony, you agree with that Army officer?
Absolutely. The standards need to be the same and they need to be high. And they need to be set by the people closest to the problem set, closest to the understanding of what is required by that job. Commanders, commanding officers, and COCOMs and elsewhere who understand the reality of what they face, that's the feedback we should get. That's what should be enshrined and enforced, and no other set of political prerogatives. When I talk about removing politics, ideological or political prerogatives should contribute to those determinations, nothing other than the execution of the mission.
Thank you. For the record, that Army officer was Captain Kristen Griest, the Army's first female infantry officer and one of its first female Ranger School graduates. One final point, you said they need to be objective, gender neutral, and high. That's because the demands are, in fact, very high. The current physical fitness test for the Army has a minimum 2-mile run of 22 miles. Run. And I want the reporter to note that I'm putting run in air quotes because 22 miles at 2 miles is not running. It may be jogging. It's probably walking fast. Let's move on. We've got a big 22 minutes. We've got a big audience here. Many of them seem to be patriotic supporters of you, Mr. Hegseth. Some of them seem to be liberal critics of you. I would note that it's only the liberal critics that have disrupted this hearing. As was my custom during the Biden administration, I want to give you a chance to respond to what they said about you. I think the first one accused you of being a Christian Zionist. I'm not really sure why that is a bad thing. I'm a Christian. I'm a Zionist. Zionism is that the Jewish people deserve a homeland in the ancient Holy Land where they've lived since the dawn of history. Do you consider yourself a Christian Zionist?
Senator, I am a Christian and I robustly support the state of Israel and its existential defense, and the way America comes alongside them is a great ally.
Thank you. Because another protester, and I think this one was a member of Code Pink, which by the way is a Chinese Communist front group these days, said that you support Israel's war in Gaza. I support Israel's existential war in Gaza. I assume, like me and President Trump, you support that war as well, don't you?
Senator, I do. I support Israel destroying and killing every last member of Hamas.
And the third protester said something about 20 years of genocide. I assume that's our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Do you think our troops were committing genocide in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Senator, I do not. I think our troops, as you know, as so many in this committee know, did the best they could with what they had. We're not the outcomes, and tragically, the outcome we saw in Afghanistan under the Biden administration put a stain on that, but it doesn't put a stain on what those men and women did in uniform, as you know full well, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Hegseth.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. At this point, I ask unanimous consent to offer to the record a letter submitted by Omar Abbasi, son of former city council president of Samarra, Iraq, who worked with Mr. Hegseth in Iraq. Without objection, that will be entered. Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hegseth. I do want to thank you for your service, and I want to thank you for your willingness to serve in this capacity.
Thank you, Senator.
I have many concerns about your record, and particularly your public statements, because they are so hurtful to the men and women who are currently serving in the U.S. military, harmful to morale, harmful to good order and discipline. If you are saying that women shouldn't be serving in the military, and I'm going to read you your quotes because the quotes themselves are terrible. You will have to change how you see women to do this job well, and I don't know if you are capable of that. So I want to press on these issues that my colleague Jean Shaheen brought up because she said it so well. So first of all, you answered your questionnaire. Do you believe that any American who wants to serve in their country in the military and can meet objective standards set by the military should be allowed to serve without limitation? You've said yes to that question. But then in all of these other circumstances, you've denigrated active duty service members. We have hundreds of women who are currently in the infantry, lethal members of our military serving in the infantry, but you degrade them. You say, we need moms, but not in the military, especially in combat units. So specific to Senator Cotton's question, because Senator Cotton was giving you layups to differentiate between different types of combat. And specifically, as secretary, would you take any action to reinstitute the combat arms exclusion for female service members, knowing full well you have hundreds of women doing that job right now? And the standards, your 2-mile run, Tom, is about the Army combat fitness test. It is not the requirements to have an MOS 11 Bravo, which is the infantry. These are the requirements today for people serving in the industry, men and women. They are gender neutral and they are very difficult to meet. They have not been reduced in any way. And our combat units, our infantry is lethal. So please explain specifically, because you will be in charge of 3 million personnel. It is a big job. And when you make these public statements, and I get you were not Secretary of Defense then, I get you were on TV, I get you were helping veterans, I get it was a different job. But most recently, you said this in November of 2024, knowing full well you might have been named as Secretary of Defense. So please explain these types of statements, because they're brutal and they're mean and they disrespect men and women who are willing to die for this country.
Well, Senator, I appreciate your comments. And I would point out, I have never disparaged women serving in the military. I respect every single female service member that has put on the uniform, past and present. My critiques, Senator, recently and in the past, and from personal experience, have been instances where I've seen standards lowered, and you mentioned 11 Alpha, 11 Bravo, MOS, places in units, and the book that has been referenced multiple times here, The War on Warriors. I spent months talking to active duty service members, men and women, low ranks, high ranks, combat arms and not combat arms. And what each and every one of them told me, and which personal instances have shown me, is that in ways direct, indirect, overt, and subtle, standards have been changed inside infantry training units, ranger school, infantry battalions, to ensure that
Give me one example. Please give me an example. I get you're making these generalized statements.
Quotas to have a certain number of female infantry officers or infantry enlisted. And that disparages those women who are
Commanders do
incredibly
not have to
capable
meet
of meeting
quotas
that
for the infantry.
standard.
Commanders do not have to have a quota for women in the infantry. That does not exist. It does not exist. And your statements are creating the impression that these exist, because they do not. There are not quotas. We want the most lethal force. But I'm telling you, having been here for 15 years, listening to testimony about men and women in combat and the type of operations that were successful in Afghanistan and in Iraq, women were essential for many of those units. When Ranger units went in to find where the terrorists hiding in Afghanistan or in Iraq, if they had a woman in the unit, they could go in, talk to the women in a village, say, where are the terrorists hiding? Where are the weapons hiding? And get crucial information to make sure that we can win that battle. So you cannot denigrate women in general, and your statements do that. We don't want women in the military, especially in combat. What a terrible statement. So please, do not deny that you've made those statements. You have. We take the responsibility of standards very seriously, and we will work with you. I'm equally distressed you would not meet with me before this hearing. We could have covered all of this before you came here, so I could get to the 15 other questions that I want to get to. So women, you have denigrated. You have also denigrated members of the LGBTQ community. Did you know that when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was in place, we lost so many crucial personnel, over 1,000 in mission critical areas. We lost 10% of all our foreign language speakers because of a political policy. You said in your statement, you don't want politics in the DOD. Everything you've said in these public statements is politics. I don't want women. I don't want moms. What's wrong with a mom, by the way? Once you have babies, you therefore are no longer able to be lethal. I mean, you're basically saying women after they have children can't ever serve in the military in a combat role. It's a silly thing to say. It's a silly thing to say beneath the position that you are aspiring to. To denigrate LGBTQ service members is a mistake. If you are a sharpshooter, you're as lethal regardless of what your gender identity is, regardless of who you love. So please know this to be a true statement. So you say it was a political thing. You say it undermined us, social engineering. I don't know why someone having to publicly say or not publicly say who they love is social engineering. I think having that policy in the first place was highly problematic. And as you said in your statement, do you agree anybody should be able to serve in the military if they meet the standards?
Senator, as the president has stated, I don't disagree with the overturn of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Great, because I don't want you thinking, can't serve if you're a mom, can't serve if you're LGBTQ, and then last, can't serve if you're a leftist. The statements you said about people who have views differently than you, that we're the enemy, are you saying that 50% of the DOD, if they hold liberal views or leftist views or are Democrats, are not welcome in the military? Are you saying that?
Senator, I volunteered to deploy to Afghanistan under Democrat President Barack Obama. I also volunteered to guard the inauguration of Joe Biden, but was denied the opportunity to serve because I was identified as an extremist by my own unit for a Christian tattoo.
Thank you very much. Senator Gillibrand, you held up a document and referred to it during your questioning. Would you like that entered into the record?
Maybe one without my marks.
Okay, yeah, okay, we'll delete.
We'll submit a
clean
clean
it up.
copy.
Without objection, that will be admitted at the point of your question. And I would like to enter into the record at this point a letter of support from retired Air Force Colonel Melissa Cunningham. Colonel Cunningham supports Mr. Hegseth and mentions his warrior ethos, combat effectiveness, and maintaining military training standards. So without objection, both of those will be admitted, and I now recognize Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, good morning. I'd like to thank you for your service to our nation in uniform and also your work on behalf of your fellow veterans and for your willingness to enter into this maelstrom of public service. I think the presence of so many veterans who have showed up to support you speaks volumes. I also want to recognize your family service and sacrifice. You know as well as anyone that it's not just the man that enters the arena, but it's the entire family who also works their way through this process as well. I appreciated our meeting with you and with your wife Jennifer this last month. I thought that we had an excellent conversation, and I appreciate your statement and your answers to the advanced policy questions, especially your desire to bring a renewed focus on warfighting and lethality back to the Pentagon. I also respect and I appreciate my friend and colleague, Senator Gillibrand, and some of her questions, and I know that she had a number of them in there. You had an opportunity to respond very briefly. Were there any other responses that you would like to make or clarifications that you would like to make before I move on to my questions?
Senator, thank you very much for the opportunity to meet and for the question. I would also acknowledge you were mentioning female engagement teams, which have shown a great deal of success on the battlefield. It would be and universally acknowledged as such. I've been in Iraqi homes where the language and gender barrier was real, and the ability to have someone there to help in that process would be a massive accelerant in mission success. So I recognize that reality. I also recognize that female engagement teams assigned to a SEAL team or a Green Beret team meet different standards also, which is okay because of the duty positions involved in that job. As far as politics, Senator, it has been the joy of my life to lead men and women in military outfits. When you're in combat or in training, there's a lot of conversations that happen. And you start to realize that a lot of people you're serving with share your political ideals or they don't. You find out there's Republicans, there's Democrats, there's Libertarians, there's Independents, there's Vegetarians, everything in between. None of that matters. It never mattered in how I led men and women, how I interacted with them, what missions we undertook. Politics has nothing to do with the battlefield, which is why President Trump has asked me to say, let's make sure all of that comes out. This is about warfighting capability, setting standards high, and making sure we give our boys, our men and women, everything they need to be successful on the battlefield. So politics can play no part in that, and I look forward to infusing that, as we always have inside our units.
I appreciate you making that very clear. And one of the areas that we want to do our best is to provide for the equipment and the technical capabilities so that no young man or woman enters into a battle as a fair fight, and that they always have the advantage. Those are the types of questions that I'd like to get into right now. And I want to start by talking about something that sometimes gets a little bit into the weeds, but I think it's critical. Mr. Hegseth, from what I've heard from 24 senior DOD officials in hearings over the last 2 years, including the Secretary of Defense, every service chief, and 8 combatant commanders, is that sharing the portion of the spectrum, and this is in the weeds, I know, but I'm going to ask it to get it on the record, the 3.1 to 3.5 gigahertz band would have extremely serious consequences and very costly consequences on our warfighting capabilities. In fact, the Department of the Navy alone has estimated that relocating their systems to a different part of the spectrum band would cost them $250 billion. That's just for the destroyers that defend our coasts with the radars that they have in them. If confirmed, what will you do to make sure that the Department of Defense can maintain its access to and the use and to be able to maneuver within the electromagnetic spectrum at home and abroad? And would you be willing to literally go to the mat with the interagency to protect warfighter requirements for the use of the spectrum?
Well, Senator, thank you for the question. And my job, in part, will be to go to the mat when necessary for things I believe are an absolute requirement for the Department of Defense and the men and women in uniform. There's no doubt about that. In this particular case, as far as spectrum, I look forward, as I've said before, getting a full class of, because this issue has come up a number of times in meetings. It's critically important with how our warfighters communicate across all services. So I'm going to get a classified briefing immediately about what that would, how it would impact the spectrum if it were to allow other companies or it to be
Rest
auctioned
assured,
off.
China
So we have to know.
China would love to have our ability to use that part of the spectrum restricted. They would
And
love that.
Absolutely right. And so I will go in with eyes only toward ensuring we have the capabilities we need and there's no disruption when I take that brief.
Thank you. In your advanced policy questions, you recognize a cooperative approach by China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea to undermine U.S. influence around the world. As you point out, aggression by any one actor would be an opportunity for others to engage the U.S. on multiple fronts along the continuum of the conflict. As we discussed in my office, neither of us wants to send our troops into a fair fight. We want to make sure that they have every advantage that the United States can give them, and that requires resources and reforms. Given the growing potential of a multi-theater conflict involving near-peer adversaries, what steps would you take to prepare the Department of Defense to simultaneously execute and sustain operations across multiple regions while maintaining readiness and deterrence globally? And I just have to make note, and I want to make it clear, we have language in this year's fiscal year 2025 National Defense Authorization Act calling for a review of the department's operational plans. And I just want to make sure that you're aware of that, and that we will have, if we have a fight with one, the chances are very good that we're going to have two battles or two different battlegrounds at the same time.
Senator, which is why I believe our country's incredibly fortunate to have a new commander-in-chief in Donald Trump, who through the strategic approach he has taken with allies and against foes has prevented wars and is determined to do the same. That's our chief job, is deter and prevent wars. My job, should I be confirmed at the Secretary of Defense, is to ensure we have the right prioritization of assets and strategy, and then the tools in the toolbox necessary, the pointiest possible spear for President Trump to wield if necessary as the last resort. So President Trump at the helm, I think, will go a long way in making sure our enemies know there's a new sheriff in town.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you very much, Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing. Thank you for being here, Mr. Hegseth. And I want to join in expressing appreciation and respect for your service to our country. And thanks to all the veterans who are here today. And thank you for your service as the ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Committee. I hope we can focus on doing better for our veterans and doing better in management of the Department of Defense. There's always room for improvement. I think what we need in that position is not just better, but the best in financial management, because those decisions are life and death decisions affecting the 3.4 million Americans who serve our national security and our national defense and put their lives on the line. I want to talk about financial mismanagement at the two organizations that you headed, which are the only test of your financial management that we have before this committee, the Veterans for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America. You took over the Veterans for Freedom in 2007. In 2008, you raised $8.7 million, but spent more than $9 million, creating a deficit. By January 2009, you told donors that the organization had less than $1,000 in the bank and debts of $434,000. By 2010, revenue at the Veterans for Freedom had dropped to about $265,000. In the next year, it had dropped further to $22,000. You don't dispute these numbers, do you?
Senator, I'm extremely proud of the work me and my fellow vets did at Vets for Freedom. A bunch of young vets with no political experience, a small group, working hard every single day. We raised donor funds. And we have letters submitted for the record from almost everyone that worked with me every single day, including our chief operating officer, who will attest that every dollar we raised was used intentionally toward the execution of our mission, which is supporting the warfighters, exactly why we're here today, the warfighters in the Iraq surge. There was a campaign in 2008, Senator. It was Barack Obama versus John McCain.
Ask you another
we believe
question,
John McCain would be the right person to win, and so we spent more.
Returns from that organization.
I'm glad they're for the record.
I'm going to ask to be entered into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
These tax returns are yours. They have your signature. And I'm going to ask that members of the committee review them because they're the only documents. I've asked for others. I've asked for the FBI report that would presumably document, it should have documented, this kind of financial mismanagement. And these are the 990s from that organization. By the year of 2011, donors had become so dissatisfied with that mismanagement, they in effect ousted you. They merged that organization with Military Families United, and thereafter you joined a second organization as executive director.
In
The
between,
Concerned
Senator, I went
Veterans-
to Harvard
I want to
University for
ask
2
you
years and
questions.
Afghanistan.
I want to ask you questions about Concerned Veterans for America. Again, another set of tax returns, the 990s from that organization. I ask they be made part of the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, both of those returns are now part of the record.
2011 to 2016. At the end of 2013, shortfall of $130,000. At the end of 2014, shortfall of $428,000. You had a surplus the following year, but then another deficit of $437,000. By the time you left, that organization had deep debts, including credit card transaction debts of about $75,000. That isn't the kind of fiscal management we want at the Department of Defense. We can't tolerate it at the Department of Defense. That's an organization with a budget of $850 billion, not 10 or 15 million, which was the case at those two organizations. And it has command responsibility for 3.4 million Americans. The highest number that you managed in those two organizations was maybe 50 people. Let me ask you, how many men and women now serve in the United States Army? What is Sen's strength?
Senator, I would like an opportunity to respond to
Well, I've asked you a
impugning of
question.
my
How many-
leadership of
how
a
many men
veterans
and women
organization, Concerned
currently
Veterans for
serve?
America. You're on the VA committee, sir, and I appreciate your service there. The VA Accountability Act and the Mission Act were all brainchilds of Concerned Veterans for America. We used our donor money very intentionally and focused to create policy that bettered the lives of veterans.
Mr. Hegseth, I'm asking you a very simple question. How many men and women currently serve in the United States Army?
Senator, the United States Army, 450,000 on active duty, sir.
And how many in the Navy?
And the Navy is 425, sir.
Well, it's 337 this year. How many in the Marine Corps?
175,000, sir.
172,300. Those numbers dwarf any experience you had by many multiples. I don't believe that you can tell this committee or the people of America that you are qualified to lead them. I would support you as the spokesperson for the Pentagon. I don't dispute your communication skills, but I believe that we are entitled to the facts here. I've asked for more documents. I assume you'd be willing to submit to an expanded FBI background check that interviews your colleagues, accountants, ex-wives, former spouses, sexual assault survivors, and others, and enable them to come forward.
Senator, I'm not in charge of FBI background checks.
But you would submit to it and support it.
I'm not in charge of FBI background checks.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. I at this point, want to submit a letter from Captain Wade Zirkle, the founder of Vets for Freedom and the person who hired Pete Hegseth to run the organization. Although the 2008 financial crisis dried up fundraising for nonprofits, Captain Zirkle says, and I quote, "Pete responded to this crisis with decisive action by reducing staff and renegotiating all debts with creditors until they were fairly resolved, an impressive feat and a testament to Pete's character. Pete departed VFF in 2010 to take on a new role with Concerned Veterans for America. Pete departed on good terms. Without objection, that will be added to the record. Senator Ernst, you're recognized for
Yes.
7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter submitted by Mr. Mark Lucas, who is a fellow Iowan and Iowa Army National Guard member. Mr. Lucas and I served together in the Iowa Army National Guard. He succeeded Pete Hegseth as Executive Director of Concerned Veterans for America. And in his letter, Mr. Lucas says that Mr. Hegseth, quote, laid a strong foundation that postured CVA for long-term success, end quote. And that Mr. Hegseth, quote, continued to be an invaluable asset to both me as a leader and the organization, end quote. So I would ask for unanimous consent to enter this Washington Times article and the letter from Mr. Mark Lucas into the record.
Without objection.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Mr. Hegseth, and thank
morning,
you very
Senator.
much. I appreciate your service to our nation. It's something that I know you are very proud of, and it is something that we have in common and that we share. You and I have had many productive conversations. And just for our audience, we have had very frank conversations. Is that correct, Mr. Hegseth?
Senator, that is a correct characterization.
You know that I don't keep anything hidden, pull no punches. My colleagues know that as well. So I do appreciate you sitting down and allowing me the opportunity to question you thoroughly on those issues that are of great importance to me. Just to recap those issues, 3 that are very important. One is the DOD and making sure that we have a clean audit. The second is women in combat, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And the third was maintaining high standards and making sure that we are combating sexual assault in the military. Okay, so Mr. Hegseth, I'm going to address the issue because this will tie into some of the financial concerns that have been raised here as well. And it's why, you know, I, trusting my fellow Iowan, asked for unanimous consent of his letter to go into the record. But like me, a lot of Iowans are really, really concerned and upset about the wasteful Washington spending and of course in our Pentagon. It's an issue that I have been combating for years. So there's significant room for greater efficiency and cost cutting within the department. And the DOD is the only federal agency that has never passed an audit. As the Senate DOJ caucus chair and founder, that's unacceptable to me, and it should be unacceptable to you as well. So I appreciate that you mentioned that in your opening statement. What are those steps that you will take to ensuring the Pentagon has a clean audit by the year 2028?
Senator, I appreciate your work on this topic, which you've been involved in for a long time. You mentioned Concerned Veterans for America. I just want to clarify. We have very generous donors who set a very clear budget that we stuck to every single year. So the latitude there was restricted, and we worked very hard and diligently inside it. You've also been a leader on the Pentagon audit for a very long time. I think when we met, Senator, I said 2014 was the first year. We discovered a 2013 op-ed I wrote about the need for a Pentagon audit because an audit is an issue of national security and frankly, respect to American taxpayers who give $850 billion over to the Defense Department and expect that we know where that money goes. And if that money is going somewhere that doesn't add to tooth and instead goes to fat or tail, we need to know that. Or if it's wasted, we need to know that. So I think previous secretaries of defense, with all due respect, haven't necessarily emphasized the strategic prerogative of an audit. And myself, my deputy SecDef, and others already know that a Pentagon audit will be the comptroller, others central to ensuring we find those dollars that can be used elsewhere. legally under the law inside the Pentagon. So you have my word, it will be a priority.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to women in combat, and I had the privilege of serving in uniform for over 23 years between our Army Reserves and our Iowa Army National Guard. Did serve in Kuwait and missions in Iraq. And so it is incredibly important that I stress, and I hope that if confirmed, you continue to stress that every man and woman has opportunity to serve their country in uniform and do so at any level as long as they are meeting the standards that are set forward. And we talked about that in my office. I do believe in high standards. Now, I was denied the opportunity to serve in any combat role because I have a lot of gray hair. And the policy has changed since then, okay? So I've been around for quite a while. But for the young women that are out there now and can meet those standards, and again, I'll emphasize they should be very, very high standards. They must physically be able to achieve those standards so that they can complete their mission. But I want to know, again, let's make it very clear for everyone here today. As Secretary of Defense, will you support women continuing to have the opportunity to serve in combat roles?
Senator, first of all, thank you for your service, as we discussed extensively as well.
It's my privilege.
And my answer is yes, exactly the way that you caveated it. Yes, women will have access to ground combat roles, given the standards remain high, and we'll have a review to ensure the standards have not been eroded in any one of these cases. That'll be part of one of the first at the Pentagon is reviewing that in a gender neutral way, the standards, ensuring readiness and meritocracy is front and center. But absolutely, it would be the privilege of a lifetime to, if confirmed, to be the Secretary of Defense for all men and women in uniform who fight so heroic. They have so many other options. They decide to put their right hand up for our country, and it would be an honor to have a chance to lead them.
Thank you. And just very briefly, we only have less than a minute left, but we have also discussed this in my office. A priority of mine has been combating sexual assault in the military and making sure that all of our service members are treated with dignity and respect. This has been so important. Senator Gillibrand and I have worked on this, and we were able to get changes made to the Uniform Code of Military Justice to make sure that we have improvements and on how we address the tragic and life-altering issues of rape, sexual assault. It will demand time and attention from the Pentagon under your watch if you are confirmed. So as Secretary of Defense, will you appoint a senior level official dedicated to sexual assault prevention and response?
Senator, as we have discussed, yes, I will.
Okay, and my time has expired. Thank you for your answers.
Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hegseth, welcome.
Thank you.
I am focused on your fitness to serve, including your character and temperament and your overall qualifications to do the job. And I do appreciate the comments of Ranking Member Reed with his concerns regarding your nomination, because I share those concerns. As part of my responsibility as a member of this committee to ensure the fitness of all nominees to come before any of the committees on which I sit, I asked the following two initial questions. First, since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement relating to this kind of conduct?
Senator, I was falsely accused in October of 2017. It was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared.
I don't think completely cleared is accurate, but the fact is that your own lawyer said that you entered into an NDA and paid a person who accused you of raping her a sum of money to make sure that she did not file a complaint. Moving on. As secretary, you will be in charge of maintaining good order and discipline by enforcing the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ. In addition to the sexual assault allegations, and by the way, the answer to my second question should have been yes. I have read multiple reports of your regularly being drunk at work, including by people who worked with you at Fox News. Do you know that being drunk at work is prohibited for service members under the UCMJ?
Senator, those
Yes
are
or no?
multiple false anonymous reports peddled by NBC
Do you
News
know that
run directly
drinking on the job
contradictory to the
is
dozens of men and women at
not
Fox News
contemplated
Channel
I'm
who
not
I work
hearing-
with
I'm
who
not
came
hearing
on
the
the
answer to my
record
question.
and said they've
In your
never
opening
seen
statement,
that.
Mr. Hegseth, you commit to holding leaders accountable at all levels. That includes you, of course. And frankly, as secretary, you will be on the job 24/7. You recently promised some of my Republican colleagues that you stopped drinking and won't drink if confirmed, correct?
Absolutely.
Will you resign as Secretary of Defense if you drink on the job, which is a 24/7 position?
I've made this commitment on behalf of
Will
the
you
men and women I'm
resign as
serving.
Secretary of Defense
I've
if
made this
you
commitment
drink
on
on the
behalf of
job?
the men and women I'm serving.
I'm not
because it's the
hearing-
most important
I'm
deployment
not
of my
hearing an
life.
answer to my question, so I'm going to move on. While you have made that commitment, you will not commit to resigning if you drink on the job. As Secretary of Defense, you will swear an oath to the Constitution and not an oath to any man, woman, or president, correct?
Senator, on multiple occasions, including as a young second lieutenant, I have sworn an oath to the
Answer is
Constitution,
yes.
and I'm proud to do so. Yes, ma'am.
In June of 2020, then President Trump directed former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper to shoot protesters in the legs in downtown DC, an order Secretary Esper refused to comply with. Would you carry out such an order from President Trump?
Senator, I was in the Washington DC National Guard unit that was in Lafayette Square during those
Would you
events.
carry
holding
out an order to
shield on
shoot
behalf of my
protesters
country.
in the legs?
I saw 50
as
Secret
directed
Service agents
to
get injured
Secretary
by
Esper?
rioters trying to jump over the fence, set
Again,
the church on fire, and
You
destroy
know
a
what, that sounds
statue.
to me that you will
Chaos.
comply with such an order. You will shoot protesters in the leg. Moving on. President-elect has attacked our allies in recent weeks, refusing to rule out using military force to take over Greenland and the Panama Canal, and threatening to make Canada the 51st state. Would you carry out an order from President Trump to seize Greenland, a territory of our NATO ally Denmark, by force? Or would you comply with an order to take over the Panama Canal?
Senator, I will emphasize that President Trump received 77 million votes to be the lawful
We're
commander-in-chief
not
of
talking
this
about the
country.
election. My question is, would you use our military to take over Greenland or an ally of Denmark?
Senator, one of the things that President Trump is so good at is never strategically tipping his hand. And so I would never in this public forum give one way or another
No,
direct what orders the president would
sounds
give
to
me
me-
in any context.
That sounds to me that you would contemplate carrying out such an order to basically invade Greenland and take over the Panama Canal. Current DoD policy allows service members and eligible dependents to be reimbursed for travel associated with non-covered reproductive health care, including abortions. Will you maintain this common sense policy?
Senator, I've always been personally pro-life. I know President Trump has as well, and we will review all policies, but our standard is whatever the president wants on this particular
Okay,
issue.
so
With my advice, I will take a
if the
look at.
president
but
tells you that this
I don't
common
believe
sense
the federal-
policy will not be maintained, you will not enable our service members to seek reproductive care. So it
I
sounds
don't
like to
believe the
me.
federal government
I'm not
should be
hearing
funding
answers to my questions,
travel for
Mr.
abortion.
Chairman. I just want to note that the other area that of serious concern to me is President Trump saying that he wants to use the military to help with mass deportations, which will cost billions of dollars. And what that will do to readiness is very, very concerning. Mr. Hegseth, I have noticed a disturbing pattern. You previously have made a series of inflammatory statements about women in combat, LGBTQ service members, Muslim Americans, and Democrats. Since your nominations, however, you have walked those back on TV in interviews and most recently in your opening statements. You are no longer on Fox and Friends, Mr. Hegseth. If confirmed, your words, actions, and decisions will have real impacts on national security and our service members' lives. There are close to 3 million personnel in the Department of Defense, $900 billion. I hardly think you are prepared to do the job. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. That wasn't a question, Mr. Hegseth. Thank you, Senator Rono. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Hegseth. Congratulations on your nomination, and thank you and your family for your service and sacrifice.
Thank you, Senator.
Now for the most important question you will receive all day. In 1935, before the Congress, the father of the United States Air Force, General Billy Mitchell, was testifying about a certain place in the world. He said, quote, "I believe that in the future, whoever holds this place will control the world. This location is the most strategic place in the world." What place was Billy Mitchell talking about? And let me give you a hint, it wasn't Greenland.
I believe he was talking about the great state of Alaska.
He was talking about the great state of Alaska. Great answer. If confirmed, will you commit to come with me to the great state of Alaska and meet our warriors who are on the front lines every day?
Senator, I have, and as I mentioned to you in the past, I did a brief training exercise up at Fort Wainwright at a previous part of my military life. I look forward to returning.
Great. And I will say, we are on the front lines with this new era of authoritarian aggression. In Alaska, the last 2 years, we've had Chinese and Russian naval task forces, joint strategic bomber task forces in our EEZ, in our ADIZ. And after his election, President Trump put out an extensive statement on Alaska, which included the following statement: "We will ensure Alaska gets even more defense investments as we fully rebuild our military, especially as Russia and China are making menacing moves in the Pacific." Mr. Hegseth, if confirmed, will you work with me, this committee, and the incoming Commander-in-Chief on continuing to build up our military assets and infrastructure in Alaska to reestablish deterrence in the Arctic and in the Indo-Pacific?
If confirmed, Senator, it would be a pleasure to work alongside you and this entire committee to recognize the very real threat in the Indo-Pacific, the very real ways, even these past couple of weeks, that Russia has attempted to probe and push in and around Alaska, and also the very real strategic significance of Alaska vis-a-vis shipping lanes through the Arctic. There are many, many ways in which Alaska is strategically significant, and with a necessary shift toward Indo-PACOM, Alaska, by necessity, will play an important role in that.
Thank you, Ms. Hegseth. I very much appreciate your focus on lethality and war fighting. We desperately need it. I want to provide a few examples of the Biden woke military, which is not focused on readiness or lethality, and want to get your comments on it. Nobody wants an extremist or racist in our military, but one of the most disgraceful and shameful things I've seen over the past 4 years as a senator on this committee and as a Marine Corps Reserve officer was on day one, the Biden administration played up a false and insulting narrative that our military was chock full of racist and violent extremists. This reached a pinnacle in this committee when Biden's Undersecretary of Policy, Colin Kahl, the number 3 guy at the Pentagon, testified that one of his top goals would be to, quote, ending violent extremism and systemic racism within the ranks of the military. He had no data on this. The media loved it, fanned the flames, wrote baloney stories on this false narrative. Disappointingly, some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle here reinforce this ridiculous narrative. One even suggesting that almost 10% of our uniformed military was extremists, 200,000 members. Ridiculous, by the way, from this committee on the other side of the aisle. Mr. Hegseth, unlike Undersecretary Kahl, you have a lot of experience with our military. Do you believe the military is a systemically racist organization? And if confirmed, will you commit to defend, not denigrate our troops?
Senator, I was also offended by those comments because anyone who's been on active duty in the National Guard, man, woman, in units, understand that is fundamentally false.
By the way, there's 3 studies, to his credit, Secretary Austin put out one of them, that said exactly what you just said. Fundamentally false.
Senator, they knew it. Anyone who'd been in a unit knew it. One could argue that if not the least, one of the least racist institutions in our country is the United States military. Being a racist in our military has not been tolerated for a very long time.
One of the
Never in my
greatest civil
formations,
rights
never in other
organizations in
formations.
America. Would you agree the U.S. military is one of the most forward-leaning, probably one of the greatest civil rights organizations in American history?
No doubt.
Let me turn to another one. Last year at a hearing before this committee, I called on the Biden Secretary of the Navy to resign. He's failing in his ability to build ships. We are being completely outbuilt in terms of ships by the Chinese. And yet this Secretary of the Navy has been focused on climate change, not building ships in lethality. Mr. Hegseth, if your Secretary of the Navy ends up focusing on climate change more than shipbuilding and lethality, commit to me to fire him?
My Secretary of the Navy, should I be confirmed, sir, will not be focused on climate change in the Navy. Just like the Secretary of the Air Force won't be focused on LG-powered fighter jets, or the Secretary of the Army will not be focused on electric-powered tanks.
Let me ask,
We're going to be focused on lethality
1 minute
and
left.
defeating our enemy.
And I appreciate that. The other thing President Biden did, his first executive order as president was to focus on transgender surgeries for active duty troops. This is all, I'm describing the woke military here under Biden over the last 4 years. If confirmed and you issue an order saying we are going to rip the Biden woke yoke off the neck of our military and focus on lethality and warfighting, how do you think the troops will react?
Senator, I know the troops will rejoice.
They will love it.
They will love it. And we've already seen it in recruiting numbers. There's already been a surge since President Trump won the election of recruiting. The Army says
Do you think our military will
surpass its
and our
recruiting
military
goals.
will follow that order?
Our military will follow that order, Senator.
Gladly.
Gladly, because they want to focus on lethality and warfighting and get all the woke, political prerogative, politically correct, social justice, political stuff out of the military.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan.
Thank you,
Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Hegseth. I'm looking forward to this opportunity to talk. I want to return to the incident that you referenced a minute ago that occurred in Monterey, California in October 2017. At that time, you were still married to your second wife, correct?
I believe so.
And you had just fathered a child by a woman who would later become your third wife, correct?
Senator, I was falsely charged, fully investigated and completely cleared.
So you think you were completely cleared because you committed no crime? That's your definition of cleared? You had just fathered a child 2 months before by a woman that was not your wife. I am shocked that you would stand here and say you're completely cleared. Can you so casually cheat on a second wife and cheat on the mother of a child that had been born 2 months before, and you tell us you are completely cleared? How is
Senator-
that a complete clear?
Senator, her child's name is Gwendolyn Hope Hegseth, and she's a child of God, and she's 7 years old.
And she
I'm
was,
glad
and
she's here.
you cheated on the mother of that child less than 2 months after that daughter was born, didn't you?
Those were false charges.
Well,
It
no,
was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared. And I am so
you've
grateful
you've
for the marriage
admitted-
I have to this
No,
amazing
you've
woman behind me.
admitted that you had sex at that hotel on October 2017. You said it was consensual, isn't that correct?
Anything,
You've admitted that it was consensual, and you were still married, and you just had a child by another woman.
again,
How do you explain your
completely
judgment?
false charges against me,
You no,
fully
wait.
investigated, and I was
You-
completely clear.
You have admitted that you had sex while you were married to wife 2 after you just had fathered a child by wife 3. You've admitted that. Now, if it had been a sexual assault, that would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, wouldn't it?
It was a false claim then and a false claim now.
If it had been a sexual assault, that would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, wouldn't it?
That was a false claim.
So
Just
you
talking
can't,
about a hypothetical.
so you can't tell me whether someone who has committed a sexual assault is disqualified from being Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I know in my instance, and I'm talking about my instance only, it was a false claim.
But you acknowledge,
And
you
it was
cheat, but you
fully
acknowledge
investigated.
that you cheated on your wife and that you cheated on the woman by whom you had just fathered a child. You have admitted that.
I will allow your words to speak for themselves.
You're not retracting that today. That's good. I assume that in each of your weddings, you've pledged to be faithful to your wife. You've taken an oath to do that, haven't you?
Senator, as I've acknowledged to everyone in this committee, not a perfect person, not claiming to
But
be.
no, I just asked a simple question. You've taken an oath, like you would take an oath to be Secretary of Defense in all of your weddings to be faithful to your wife. Is that correct?
I have failed in things in my life, and thankfully I'm redeemed by my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
In finalizing divorces from your first and second wives, were there non-disclosure agreements in connection with those divorces?
Senator, not that I'm aware of.
If there were, would you agree to release those first and second wives from any confidentiality agreement?
Senator, it's not something I'm aware of.
But if there were, you would agree to release them from a confidentiality agreement?
Senator, that's not my responsibility.
Did you ever engage in any acts of physical violence against any of your wives?
Senator, absolutely not.
But you would agree with me that if someone had committed physical violence against a spouse, that would be disqualifying to serve as Secretary of Defense, correct?
Senator, absolutely not have I ever done that.
You would agree that that would be a disqualifying offense, would you not?
Senator, you're talking about a hypothetical.
I don't think it's a hypothetical. Violence against spouses occurs every day. And if you as a leader are not capable of saying that physical violence against a spouse should be a disqualifying fact for being secretary of the most powerful nation in the world, you're demonstrating an astonishing lack of judgment. The incident in Monterey led to a criminal charge, a criminal investigation, a private settlement, and a cash payment to the woman who filed the complaint. And there was also a non-disclosure agreement, correct?
It was a confidential settlement agreement off of a nuisance lawsuit.
Right. During an interview, you claimed that you settled the matter because you were worried that if it became public, it might hurt your career. Do you maintain that you were blackmailed?
Senator, I maintain that false claims were made against me. And ultimately,
Your attorney
those
used
false
the phrase,
claims,
your-
I have the opportunity to attest my innocence in those false claims.
But you didn't reveal any of this to President Trump or the transition team as they were considering you to be nominated for Secretary of Defense. You didn't reveal the action. You didn't reveal the criminal complaint. You didn't reveal the criminal investigation. You didn't reveal the settlement. You didn't reveal the cash payment. Why didn't you inform the commander-in-chief and the transition team of this very relevant event?
Senator, I've appreciated every part of the process with the transition team. They have been open and honest with me. We've had great conversations between the two of us. And I appreciate the opportunity that President-elect Trump has given me.
You chose not to reveal this, right? Because you knew it would hurt your chances. So you chose not to reveal this really important thing to the commander-in-chief and the transition team because you were worried about your chances rather than trying to be candid with the future president of the United States. Are there any other important facts that you chose not to reveal to the president-elect and his team as they were considering you to be Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I sit here before you an open book, as everyone who's watched this process.
With multiple non-disclosure and confidentiality agreements tying the hands of many people who would like to comment to us. Much has been made of your workplace behavior as a leader of nonprofit veterans organizations and as a Fox News contributor. Were you fired from either of the leadership positions with the nonprofits?
I was the leader. I was the CEO of Concerned
I know
Veterans
which
for
ones,
America and the
those
executive
two,
director
were
of
you
Vets for
fired?
Freedom.
Were you fired from either
And I
of
was
them?
never fired from a
Do you have
veterans
do you
organization.
have non-disclosure agreements with either of those organizations?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator.
Many of your work colleagues have said that you show up for work under the influence of alcohol or drunk. I know you've denied that, but you would agree with me, right, that if that was the case, that would be disqualifying for somebody to be Secretary of Defense.
Senator, those are all anonymous false claims, and the totality.
They're not anonymous.
The letters
We've
on the
seen-
record here.
They're not anonymous.
On the record. people
We've
who've
seen
worked me
records with
at
names
Vets for
attached to them.
Freedom, Concerned Vets for America, and Fox News
One of
attributing
your
to me
one of
being
your colleagues
working
said,
hard every day on behalf of
One of
my
your
mission.
colleagues said that you got drunk at an event at a bar and chanted, "Kill all Muslims." Another colleague, not anonymous, we have this, said that you took coworkers to a strip club. You were drunk, you tried to dance with strippers, you had to be held off the stage, and one of your employees in that event filed a sexual harassment charge as a result of it. Now, I know you denied these things, but isn't that the kind of behavior that, if true, would be disqualifying for somebody to be Secretary of Defense?
Senator, anonymous false charges.
They're not anonymous. And I'll just conclude and say this to the chairman. You claim that this was all anonymous. We have seen records with names attached to all of these, including the name of your own mother. So don't make this into some anonymous press thing. We have seen multiple names of colleagues consistently throughout your career that have talked about your abusive actions,
Chairman, I think
attitudes,
he's
words,
over
and
his time.
statements
He's way
to women.
over his
I
time.
now yield.
And thank you very much. I now ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a family court order concerning the appointment of parenting time between Mr. Hegseth and Mrs. Samantha Hegseth. It states that there were no claims of domestic abuse or probable evidence of abuse in the relationship. Without objection, that will be added to the record. And we now move to Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hegseth, for your service, for your willingness to endure this. And I'm sorry for what has been happening to you, particularly the very idea that you should have to sit there and answer hypothetical potential in somebody's imagination crimes that may take place at some point. And wouldn't that disqualify you if you were a murderer or if you were a rapist? Unfair. And I'm embarrassed for this behavior. But first, I want to say thank you for your strong proclamation, unapologetic proclamation of faith in Jesus Christ. I sat here and listened to your opening statement and thought, wow, this is a guy who in today's culture is willing to stand up and say the first thing is first, faith in Jesus Christ. And I was reminded of what Christ said in Matthew, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and these things shall be added unto you. You are going to have a great future as our secretary, and I look forward to that day happening. I also want to get back to, you mentioned, and it got rather dismissed quickly, pivoted as a lot of things do. You'd mentioned that you were not able to serve